Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And on this episode of the Kongversation, we will be discussing death. The death of a loved one. The loved one that is being the Nintendo 3DS. And by extension, the entire line of Nintendo handheld systems dating back to 1989 with the Game Boy. So, this is something we knew that was probably coming, once they announced the Switch, Cameron, but it's been a couple of years and they still had the odd release for the 3DS. So it was just kind of like this waiting game. And I don't know, like I was kind of hoping they would somehow keep justifying having a 3DS around, but no, here we are. They just announced the other week that they're ceasing production on Nintendo 3DS models and cutting off the assembly line. So we're going to be discussing on this episode to come sort of we're not going to be going like beat by beat. And then in 1989, Nintendo RND1, but we are going to be reminiscing about the handhelds, I guess, 5 major Nintendo handhelds from the late 80s up through this year. And we'll be discussing our favorite DKU moments on each one, as well as discussing what's next for Nintendo and handhelds and where they could go from here without a dedicated platform. And we will be discussing, the Switch and how that legacy kind of continues, but not really. It's sort of like having your cake and eating it too. You're just going to get diabetes quicker. So it's not always a great solution. Anyway, so we'll be getting into all of that, but I do want to remind everyone to check out DK Vine on Twitch. We are on Twitch, and I am now streaming not only our weekly Sea of Thieves streams, but I am also streaming DK Vine Done Slow, which is my new series on Twitch, where I play the Donkey Kong universe very, very slowly. And I'm not doing this in any chronological order. I'm not doing it really in order of preference. I'm just picking a game out of the big hat and taking a very, very long time to beat it. And I did Donkey Kong Country, wrapped that up the other week. And this past week, I moved on to the original Yooka-Laylee. So I will be probably playing that for close to 2 months. And yeah, just sit down every session, play for about 2 hours. I go into excruciating detail, pointing out different things in all of the environments, the history of the development, lore things, all of that. Everything except playing the game well. But I will get through it, and then I'll move on to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. And it's been a lot of fun. So check that out. I'm streaming those at the moment on Wednesdays. So check your local listings. But that will be found at dkvine.com/Twitch. So make sure to subscribe to the Twitch channel, check out the VODs, and then all episodes are archived on YouTube once the VOD, which stands for Video on Demand, Grandpa, once those are no longer available. So check that out. And also just want to remind too, hey, I mentioned YouTube. We are on YouTube. It's dkvine.com/PooTube because of our legendary battles with that video sharing service. And make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and that can be found at either dkvine.com/those respective social media platforms, or putting those social media platforms first and then doing /DKVine. I think Instagram was a little bit, there's like DKVine something 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 because we had some problems there. But anyway, you'll find it. So check that out. All right, Cameron, how you doing?
Doing well. Which is weird because this is a eulogy episode.
Yeah, I know. I'm always the one who makes dark jokes at funerals because that's how I process sad news. I'm always the one who has to kind of break the tension and add some levity, if just for my own sake. So yeah, we'll be cracking some jokes about the Nintendo handhelds, and we'll be toasting them and putting them into the ground. Honestly, this is sad. This is sad in my opinion, and I know a lot of people don't see the difference, right? It's like, okay, so they're not making 3DS games anymore. So what? So what? Because the Switch is a handheld system. It's a console. You can play it on your TV, but you can also take it on the go. And isn't that even better?
Yeah, how in theory, couldn't we be eulogizing Nintendo's home consoles as well?
Well, no, because there's a fundamental difference here between, yeah, you can take something like Breath of the Wild on the go, and that's amazing. That's awesome because, you know, in the past, you would have had to wait several handheld iterations for that game to somehow be recalibrated to become a handheld remake or a port or something, and then you could take it on the go.
And something would probably suffer in that translation.
Well,
I mean, something does if it was a generation after.
I mean, generally, something does suffer when you take the Switch on the go. You know, frame rate drops and whatever. But I get the point that people make. Well, this is great because now like the main AAA titles that Nintendo's pumping out, you can have you can have it on your TV, you can have it in the car, doesn't matter. And to that I say, yeah, that is awesome and I love that. But that's overlooking what having two dedicated Nintendo platforms in the same generation offered. And that was variety and casting a wider net, especially for the fish that you want to catch, i.e. your favorite franchises. So when we look at the history of the Donkey Kong universe on Nintendo's handhelds, we get a lot of quirky entries that we would have never seen on a console. And now I realize everything is kind of shifting with mobile gaming kind of filling that void. But that's a whole can of worms right there. That's not quite the same either. So this is really the end of an era in so many ways. And when I think about what the Donkey Kong universe means to me, I would not be as much of a DKU fan, a Donkey Kong fan, a Rare fan, whatever, if it weren't for that massive handheld output, that library of games released for the handheld systems from 1995 onward. They're never my favorite. Right, because like my top 4 games of all time, top 5 games, really like top 10 games of all time, they're console games. Like I'm not gonna lie there, but the handheld games have always done such a great job of filling in the gaps. And we discussed this on the Donkey Kong Land episode we did back in the summer for that game's 25th anniversary. Why Donkey Kong Land still matters. And that was the game that really started to delve into the lore of Donkey Kong's world and then kind of like fleshed out some of the history of the Kremlin civilization. And then you had Big Ape City and just really expanded, no pun intended, what Donkey Kong could be from our limited understanding of it from Donkey Kong Country. And like handheld games are always there as kind of, yeah, they were always viewed as lesser in some regard, but I can't imagine, for example, my love of the Banjo-Kazooie series being what it is without a Grunty's Revenge. You know,
I do feel like we're going to feel that part of the paradigm missing because, like, I mean, not necessarily lesser, but I feel like the existence of a handheld platform in addition to a console platform made it okay to have companion titles. Like, you could have something more bite-sized, something a bit weirder, and the fact that it was on a handheld system made it okay.
It blunted the absurdity of it, because you kind of expected things to be a little looser. It's kind of like the difference between going to a comedian's stage show that's being broadcast on HBO versus visiting them at the local comedy club where they're workshopping material. It's going to be rougher. It's going to be a little bit more hit or miss, but it has this kind of raw intimacy that you can't replicate. That's what the Game Boy was. It was workshopping material, or in this case, canon.
I think now it would be much harder to conceptualize now, like, let's say, in between Tropical Freeze, or even just in between, like, Returns and Tropical Freeze, if there was, like, a middle Donkey Kong Country that had, like, say, 3 worlds, was like a bit lower production value, and was called something like Off Kilter, like Donkey Kong Country, like Peninsula or something, like, just it would be weird, right? It would be weird to have that on the same console as the I suppose now $60 mega hits. Blowout games, whereas you have a handheld, you can totally pull off something like that. And I mean, it's not to say that never happens. Memorably, I think like I would say a comparable situation would be something Ratchet and Clank did. They had like the middle game in their Future series was a bit shorter, and they charged a bit less for it to compensate, and it was a download only title. But it's still a weird thing you don't see happen too often.
Yeah, and that is where the Game Boy originally really came in, and I think, the stage was set for that when, they wanted a Mario game for it, so Nintendo R&D 1 gave us Super Mario Land, which felt weirder. It felt more surreal than like the console Super Mario games, the Super Mario Brothers and then the Super Mario Worlds. It just felt like it was almost a bit of a fever dream, like you were dreaming about Mario, but it felt slightly wrong. And I think that kind of set the template for what the Game Boy iterations of games could be. Now, it didn't always go down that way, of course, but when you look at something, even like Zelda, when we had Link's Awakening, that is vastly different in some ways to A Link to the Past, which would have been, the more contemporary title at the time on the consoles. And you could get a little bit sillier with it without, I think, upsetting the integrity of the series. And that was certainly the case with Donkey Kong Land, as we mentioned, flying pigs and all. And, as time went on, we kind of got away from that, where then the trend wasn't so much make a new game, it was make a remake of an older game. And that really started with the Game Boy Advance, right? Now, we would, of course, have a lot of new titles in the Game Boy Advance, but then they started porting all the old Mario console titles on handheld, and then they're on handheld for the first time. We got the whole Donkey Kong Country trilogy remade, and then we eventually got Diddy Kong Racing DS and all of that. But even during that time, we still had new bizarre Donkey Kong games. And
the nice thing about handhelds too is also the technology is always a step behind whatever the current console is. So whenever new content will come out for the Game Boy Advance, in the back of my mind, I would think like, oh, this is like getting a brand new Super Nintendo game in the mid-2000s.
I mean, essentially, yeah. And I think that we've in some ways become spoiled by things like the Switch, where you couldn't really, I guess you could get away with that if it was presented in the right context, right? But
I mean, mind the Switch is still like a step behind in power from its contemporaries, but the degree to which it isn't as like noticeable to somebody who's just looking at them at a glance.
Yeah. Yeah, a good thing to bring up to your point would be Mario Kart Super Circuit, where it was essentially taking Mario Kart 64 but filtering it through the original Super Mario Kart. So you would have the pseudo Mode 7 graphics, but with the N64 sprites and kind of philosophies sprinkled on top of it. So it would kind of be like, oh, if you're a fan of Mario Kart 64, here's a new game. But if you're a purist who prefers Super Mario Kart, here you go. So it was kind of like, even when you had to bid farewell to a console and bring in the new one, you could still kind of live in the past through the upcoming handheld. And because, the Nintendo DS, what was that? That was essentially a portable N64, given the output we started to get for that. So, I mean, I am a huge admirer of all of Nintendo's handhelds. And when we look back at, like, the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, it was, I mean, for the time, pretty cool, but it was clunky. It was pea soup green. It was hard to see even under good lighting, and it was what it was. It wasn't until really we got the Super Game Boy peripheral, the essentially Super Nintendo cartridge that you could plug Game Boy games in and then play on your Super Nintendo, that I really felt like I could beat Game Boy games. Like, I could really wrap my head around it, visually get into it without having to worry about losing the lighting or my batteries dying or any of that.
As nostalgic as I'll be for a lot of these, I am not nostalgic at all for trying to figure out a way to actually see these games in low light.
Yeah, and that did get better when they released the Game Boy Pocket, which was the kind of the sleeker model, released in 96, I want to say. And it had the more crystal clear LCD screen. And I never had one of those. My friend did. And I remember like just admiring viewing Donkey Kong Land games on it and just how crystal clear it looked. But I didn't get one because I sort of had a feeling that a better Game Boy was on its way, which it was with the Game Boy Color like 2 years later. So I got one of those. But the original Game Boy, I mean, when you look at its lifespan and how it lasted for over a decade, I mean, you had the Game Boy Color come out, but released in the West, at least at the very tail end of when the original Game Boy was on store shelves and before it was supplanted by the Game Boy Color, you had Pokemon Red and Blue. And so those came out in 98, like right before the Game Boy Color. So that definitely extended the life of the original Game Boy dramatically.
And even when the Game Boy Color was well out and there were companies making games that it would exclusively play on that, there were still a myriad of games that were still compatible with the original Game Boy. Just obviously the display wasn't in color. Gold and Silver were like that.
Conker's Pocket Tales.
Conker's Pocket Tales got a little bit more extreme than most with it.
Oh yeah, it was extreme, all right. Yeah, I think younger gamers, and I realize, Cameron, you're a few years younger than I am, so I might be throwing you in the pit here. Younger gamers don't remember how dire things were, even as a contemporary of the Game Boy. You had the Tiger Electronics LCD games that were just absolute shit. Although there was a Battletoads one. I believe there was a Battletoads Tiger Electronics. Not even a port. It was just it's just this cheap thing. But essentially they were like Game & Watches, but worse. And they were everywhere in the early 90s. And then, there's the Game Gear from Sega, which I always remember envying, like, how does Sega have a color system? Oh my god, this makes the Game Boy look pathetic. And then you actually play one, and it's cool, but then you realize the battery lasts about an hour, and it's honestly not what it's cracked up to be. Once you get over the initial, whoa, it's in color, it quickly fell apart after that.
I think it like puts into perspective, like a lot of the Game Boy, the original Game Boy's longevity wasn't necessarily because it was the best thing ever at what it did, but just it was the most accessible and widespread version of what it did.
Yes, and I think it had the highest degree of quality control for its output. Not third-party games, necessarily. There was a ton of shit on the Game Boy, and I owned some of that shit.
I mean, that was also true of their consoles at the time, so...
It was true of the industry at the time. I owned Ren and Stimpy's Space Cadet. I don't even remember its goddamn name, but it was flat-out garbage. But it was one of those licensed third-party games that kids wanted to buy back, when they're of a certain age. They're like, I'm a fan of Ren and Stimpy. They have a Game Boy game. Sure. So that's the game I got with my Game Boy. I got my Game Boy for my birthday one year. Was it 91 or 92? It might have been 92. Maybe even 93. I can't even remember if it was that late, but I had Ren and Stimpy Space Cadet Adventures, or whatever the hell it's called for it. I only got to the second world or level or whatever the hell it was because it was unplayable. It was just clunky as shit. But, I quickly got better games for it over time. I think Christmas brought me some salvation there. And that being said, I don't think I really had a Game Boy game I loved until Donkey Kong Land. And, I already waxed poetic about Donkey Kong Land on this podcast in the last several episodes, so I'm not going to waste my time just relitigating that. But Donkey Kong Land, for as clunky as it could be in some respects, especially in comparison to both its Super Nintendo counterpart and later entries in the series, it really just stoked the fires in my mind. And that's the game that made me a Donkey Kong fanatic, a modern Donkey Kong fanatic, a Rare's Donkey Kong fanatic, a Donkey Kong Universe fanatic, whatever. That's the game that made me think yeah, I love Donkey Kong Country, and I was crazy about that game, but now I'm really in love with this world, and getting to take that on the go and also play it at home on my Super Game Boy with that beautiful jungle border really made me feel like I could just immerse myself in the world of Donkey Kong Island all the more. And I think from there, I probably didn't play really any other games on my Game Boy, my original Game Boy, other than Donkey Kong Land titles after that. I had the Mortal Kombat port for the Game Boy, which also was terrible. I did beat that though. Somehow I beat that clunky ass fighter where you it's just sluggish and you just basically kick Goro and then he falls over, and then you kick Shang Tsung and then he falls over, and yay, you won the Mortal Kombat. But yeah, I think once Donkey Kong Land came out, I don't remember playing really any Game Boy games other than Donkey Kong Land, up until Pokemon, which I mostly played on my Game Boy Color. I don't think I ever really played Pokemon on the brick Game Boy, because I got Pokemon with my Game Boy Color, even though it wasn't for Game Boy Color.
I mean, this is where I crawl out of the younger generation pit and immediately fall back in, but I actually did not own the original brick Game Boy. My first Game Boy was the Game Boy Color. I had friends who did own the original brick, but I didn't own a Game Boy myself until Pokemon Madness kind of swept the world, and it kind of came like, you need to get this because all of the kids at school have it, and you are being peer pressured into Pokemania. You need a Game Boy.
You know what's interesting for me about Pokemon, because I have this reputation, Cameron, as being somebody who doesn't really get out into the wider gaming world outside of the Donkey Kong universe or Rare or Playtonic, and I don't. I really don't. I reference like something about Shovel Knight on my ukulele, DK Vine Done Slow, and I really showed my ignorance about Shovel Knight outside of that appearance in ukulele, and I guess Smash Brothers Ultimate, but and Gibbon like I think called me out, but I don't really expand my horizons much, and I stopped really when I got into adulthood, because, you know, who has the time to really keep up with everything, especially when you have to run a Donkey Kong fan site and everything attached to that. So I didn't have the time. But Pokemon I got into not via peer pressure. I was the first one in all my friend groups to play it. Because I remember reading about it in Nintendo Power when it was still in Japan and still being called Pocket Monsters. Like, they still thought they were going to market it in the West as Pocket Monsters. And I remember reading about it and thinking, this sounds really cool. Just the whole idea of kind of collecting, but inside of the video game and, you know, training them. And I was like, you know, this really appeals to some sort of hyper OCD, the lizard center of my brain. I really want to check this out if it ever comes out here. Because at the time, Nintendo Power wasn't even sure if it was going to be localized outside of Japan. Could you imagine a world where that never happened? But so when Pokemon came out in 98, it was really the only Game Boy title I wanted at the time of the Game Boy Color. But I also wanted a Game Boy Color. So I just kind of called a mulligan with my mom, and I was like, look, this is what I want actually, no, what happened was I wanted the Game Boy Color for my birthday, but I didn't ask for any games for it. And then I asked for Pokemon for Christmas, and I somehow knew in advance my mom had already gotten it for me for Christmas. So I just kind of bartered my way into also getting Pokemon for my birthday with the Game Boy Color. Anyway, yeah, I was the first one in my social circle to buy into the Pokemon mania, and then my friends got super hardcore into it, like buying the trading card game and watching the anime religiously, and then I kind of like backed away from it over time. But yeah, I think Pokemon was like one of the few games I remember like seeking out based on me reading into the hype prior to it actually having hype. So I'm not like the complete zealot people write me off as.
Yeah, and I mean, I did get peer pressured into it, but I did adore Pokemon once I got into it. A little too much, but a funny thing is, as a consequence of starting with the Game Boy Color and not the original Game Boy, I probably remember original Game Boy titles very differently than people who grew up with a brick Game Boy. Because the Game Boy Color, if you play an original Game Boy game on it, it tends to default to a color with an asterisk palette of, I think it's generally like inactive sprites and background tiles are shades of blue and active sprites are shades of red.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So, like, I picture these, like, playing Pokemon Red in the back of my mind, and it's, all the backgrounds are blue, and there's a dark red Blastoise on the screen, and he's kind of posed weird with his gut out, and these drawings are kind of weird, and they don't match all the artwork I've seen everywhere else. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, and I forget about that because I mostly have played Pokemon, the original Pokemon, in recent years on the 3DS, which is portrayed in black and white, or at least like sharp black and white, rather than like the pea soup black and white that would have been on the Game Boy, the brick Game Boy.
The 3DS is kind of like had the effect of making me into a Game Boy hipster, because I will like deliberately set the game with the green pea soup palette to just see how like this is how it was supposed to look back in the day.
See, having lived that, I have no desire to.
And then after a few seconds, I might switch it back to the black and white because it's just too hard to see.
It's awful. And also, can I just say that the original Game Boy also yellowed so quickly. Like it had the effect, the same like plastic that a Super Nintendo was made out of, or at least it seemed to be, where it just would discolor into this disgusting sort of like public restroom tile, like after men had urinated all over it. Just horrific kind of shade that like Nintendo didn't really start making their consoles sexy, at least in the West, until the N64, because then they started adding like curves to it, and they like started using like sleeker colors rather than just drab gray.
I look at the Game Boy and I think of any hardware like Nintendo has put out, console or handheld, at least in the West. This is a device from 1989, and it looks like 1989. Just it's the most evocative of the aesthetic of its era, I think.
Just big and bulky.
The bulky, the magenta and purple.
Yeah, it's funny how I never really thought about that, because for me, the Game Boy is more of a timeless thing than like the Zach Morris phone. But you're absolutely right. It is a product of 1989, and I think the fact that it lasted as long as it did, like it transcended that era through the grunge era up until almost like the Backstreet Boys.
It lasted long enough to be in the file select of Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's still in the file select of Banjo-Kazooie on the XBLA version.
Shh, don't tell anybody.
I can't believe that, because they had to change. Didn't they change Live and Reloaded? Didn't Conker have a Game Boy Advance?
He had a Game Boy Advance SP that I think they changed into just a generic sci-fi handheld.
Yeah, but somehow Banjo is still playing a brick Game Boy on a rare replay.
Yeah, I think in the XBLA games they could edit sound effects, they could edit textures, but they generally tried to leave model geometry alone. So for something like that, it's just get rid of the Game Boy startup sound, possibly blur the texture so it's less obviously says Game Boy, but that's the extent we can do. There's only so much you can do to obscure the fact that it's very obviously a big brick in Banjo's hand.
Yeah. Like the Game Boy, for as much as I love it, I have to be honest, like the original Game Boy probably, aside from the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, probably means less to me than everything from the Game Boy Color on. Because I feel like Nintendo really started to get into this groove, and Pokemon definitely helped. Like, it made the Game Boy platform a kind of desirable platform to develop for, because all of a sudden you had like the hottest thing in the world on the Game Boy, the original Game Boy too, not even for the Game Boy Color. So I think it attracted more developers for it, like trying to like maybe chase that gold rush.
Oh, to be certain, if it's a device every kid on your block owns, you want to get in on that.
Yeah. Before I move on to the Game Boy Color, I should point out that I'm not mentioning the Virtual Boy, despite the fact that the Virtual Boy is listed in many places as a Nintendo handheld. And I think that's mostly from people who have never fucking played a Virtual Boy.
I remember having this discussion in a Discord where people were hashing out the terminology for the Virtual Boy. I think it qualifies as a portable, but a handheld, no.
It's barely portable, Cameron.
I mean, portable with an asterisk.
Yeah, you can pick it up and carry it around. You can do that with anything, though, Cameron. I think I have a Virtual Boy briefcase that I got from Blockbuster Video when they were liquidating their Virtual Boy supplies. And that's how old I am. I got a Virtual Boy briefcase from Blockbuster Video.
Man, those GameCube kids had it easy. They didn't have to buy a briefcase for their console to have a handle.
But that is the only way the Virtual Boy is like a portable title in my book, because it would be clunky to transport it otherwise. Now, the Virtual Boy was, yes, it was like the brainchild of Gunpei Yokoi, who was Nintendo R&D one, who was very much part of the Game Boy and Game & Watch history, but I think that is probably the only like connections you can make to it, and to the nomenclature, boy, Virtual Boy. But I think the Virtual Boy was always meant to actually be a like third pillar of Nintendo that never really panned out. Sort of like how they pitched the Nintendo DS. Like, no, this isn't replacing the Game Boy Advance. This is a third pillar of Nintendo. It was smash cut to a year later.
It was always, I think, a stopgap, and as much as it kind of haunted Gunpei for the rest of his years, that like he was attached to this thing as a creator, he got dealt a bad hand with the.
He definitely did, and like this is kind of going on a tangent here, but I will defend the Virtual Boy to my dying day. I think the Virtual Boy was brilliant in its own way. The problem was the marketing, and it was a tough concept to get around, especially considering that everybody expected it to be straight up VR in 95, like this affordable VR headset that we had like seen in popular culture and sci-fi and everything, as kids in the early 90s. Like, everybody expected the Virtual Boy to be that, and it was black and red, and it really wasn't like quite like VR is today, like we associate it.
It was also the 3D fad too that comes and goes.
3D fad is now out again, but it'll be back.
It came and went over the life of the 3DS.
Yeah, I know. The 3DS was kind of a response to what, Avatar? Like, not The Last Airbender, but the James Cameron Avatar that we're somehow getting 4 sequels to that nobody asked for. That Avatar, and it's like, yeah, everything's got to be 3D. Oh, Peter Jackson's making The Hobbit. It's got to be in 3D. Oh, what... Like, George Lucas wants to go back and make all 6 Star Wars movies in 3D. Here's the Phantom Menace. Yeah. Oh, we're not going to do that anymore.
You're talking to somebody whose butt was in a seat for Lion King 3D.
Oh, wow.
The 2D animated conversion to 3D.
Wow. Yeah, I saw Avatar in 3D. I think I saw another movie or two in 3D, and that was it.
And I mean, I'm making light of it, but the 3D Lion King was really cool, but it was also just odd that it existed at all.
Yeah.
The execution was great, but why?
A lot of those like post-conversion 3D movies where we're taking a movie that was never intended for 3D and making it 3D. It was just like, what is this? But yeah, the Virtual Boy, it had its place. It just was never going to find its audience. I think like there are Virtual Boy games I hold up as some of Nintendo's best. Of course, Wario Land, Virtual Boy Wario Land, terrific game. Not enough people played it, but even shit like Galactic Pinball, which I go on about. I think it's my favorite iteration of any pinball that I've ever played ever on any platform. And then the Mario's Tennis game is pretty fun. I think you just had to kind of build games around the weird aesthetic, and it was really good for like sci-fi or fantasy settings. But anything that really required replicating the real world, there was a golf game for the Virtual Boy that was just like, what is this? It's red and black, and you're golfing at night, and it was like, no, golf does not work on this platform, but yeah, pinball in space. That is perfect for what the Virtual Boy was. I love the Virtual Boy. I've still got my Virtual Boy in my office here, and it still smells like the weird foam scented. It smells like burnt tires, and it's great. Every time I smell burned tires, I think of Gunpei Yokoi. Anyway, so the Virtual Boy, I wouldn't count that really. It's kind of its own thing, but people are going to want to lump it in. So I just wanted to say Virtual Boy, Virtual Boy, Virtual Boy.
Yeah. I did want to bring this up. I debated waiting until the 3DS, until we talk about that, but I feel like I should just mention it now before I forget. I think the 3DS, the 3DS's lifespan was the grim, like, confirmation that Nintendo will never revisit the Virtual Boy library. Because if there was any opportunity to ever bring it back, it would have been on the 3D system that launched in with a red and black case and had a virtual console library.
Yeah, it's upsetting to say the least. And I think Nintendo is just historically adverse to really having like a dedicated back catalog, a back library of all of their games. They'll do it sporadically, right? But there's never really like, when you compare it to like Xbox and how many of their old games you can just play on the Xbox One.
There's also just, and I think they've gotten better about this over time. There was for a long period just this like sense of shame they had about the Virtual Boy, like just bury it. And I think they've let up on that now, but I think it was a major roadblock to even acknowledging it for a long period of time. Like how you can't even see it in the Super Smash Bros. Melee trophy room unless you set the language to Japanese.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like Nintendo of America has bigger shame about it than Nintendo of Japan does, because it's been referenced in Japanese only releases a lot more than it ever has over here. Although, you know, they're a little bit better about it. Like you could see in the concept art, Retro wanted to have Virtual Boy themed stages.
That could have also been in the 3DS port.
I know, Cameron. Trust me. As probably the world's biggest Virtual Boy fan and the world's biggest Donkey Kong Country fan, at the very least, the person who is right in the middle of the Venn diagram of both of those, I know. I've thought about it so much. And, you know, maybe one day, you know, management at Nintendo will change, ethos at Nintendo will change, and they will actually sit down and have, like, we got to get have all of our games available in some form or fashion. Again, at least all of the games that were developed by us that we own. But it is a shame. I mean, honestly, it is what it is. Nintendo are who they are. We have more N64 games that you can play on the Xbox One than you can on the Switch. So, just whatever, man. All right. Well, the Game Boy Color, though, that was really, I think, when the Game Boy started getting sexy. I feel like the original Game Boy was thought of by the mainstream as a toy, right? Because even the name Game Boy is like this juvenile version of the Walkman. The Walkman from Sony, which was, you know, the classic cassette player from the 80s that you could just strap on.
I never thought about that, but it does sound like a response directly to the name Walkman.
Yeah. Then there was a take on the Walkman from Home Alone 2, the Talk Boy, which was actually made a thing, I think, by Tiger Electronics. This is the most I mentioned Tiger Electronics in one episode of Kongversation ever. But yeah, the Game Boy, I very much feel like was a response to Sony's Walkman, but it sounds like this juvenile thing. Like, well, video games are for children. It's called the Game Boy, and maybe, you know, it's also like the little brother to the NES. So,
and as weird as like sad as it was to see the brand die with the Nintendo DS, like when they retired the Game Boy name, it did become a brand that got increasingly weird the longer it stuck around.
It did, although I would say that it's one of those like ubiquitous things that eventually the brand transcended itself. So you didn't really think about what the name implied or meant. Yeah. And that's what the Game Boy Color was kind of the middle ground of. The Game Boy was dismissed by and large as a toy. Video games are for children. We were still in that era when it was released. And it was just this thing for prepubescents. The Game Boy Color was this middle ground where it started to get sleeker, and it was smaller and more powerful. And obviously, like, Pokemon Mania probably still shackled it to that conception until the Game Boy Advance really started to change things. And then the Game Boy Advance SP really, like, kicked things in a high gear. But for me, what I associate the Game Boy Color with, besides Pokemon Red and Blue, which is what I honestly played the most of all my Game, like, the Game Boy Color is my one Game Boy system that I did not spend the majority of time playing DKU games. I played Pokemon. I walked around the grass as a Pallet Town. I walked around the grass as a Pallet Town. But the Game Boy Color did have some notable DKU moments, although I would say maybe outside of the 3DS, it is the most lesser handheld of the bunch when it comes to the DKU. There were notable releases for sure, but I don't think it left quite the legacy it did, because we got Conker's Pocket Tales from Rare, which was a hybrid Game Boy Color release. It was one of the rare black Game Boy Color cartridges. It looked like a regular Game Boy cartridge, but just in all black, and it could work on both the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. Like, because all Game Boy Color, or all Game Boy games worked on the Game Boy Color, but Game Boy Color games would not work on the original Game Boy unless they were these hybrid cartridges.
Yeah, and they generally did a very good job of having you be able to identify based on the shape and color of the cartridge. Like, generally a Game Boy Color exclusive game would be in translucent plastic and have, like, a bumped out, like a convex Game Boy Color logo on it versus a concave Game Boy logo on a Game Boy cartridge.
Yeah. Although you could still fit your pure Game Boy Color games in the old. Early in the Game Boy's lifespan, they were all packaged with these plastic translucent cases. And I remember at a certain point later in the Game Boy's lifespan, by the time we got to the mid-90s, they didn't package them with games anymore. You just got the naked game. So what I did was I took all of my translucent cases away from the earlier releases and I gave them to Donkey Kong Land so they would be safe. I was like, oh, Ren and Stimpy, you're exiled from your case. This is Donkey Kong Land's case now. And I also gave one to Conker's Pocket Tales, and then, which was shaped like a regular cartridge. But then I also gave it to Mario Golf for Game Boy Color, Donkey Kong Country for Game Boy Color, and Mario Tennis for Game Boy Color. So all of my Game Boy and Game Boy Color games are in those original early 90s translucent cases that came packaged with the early titles. And I don't even know what happened to the games that were once housed in those. They're probably somewhere in my parents' attic somewhere, suffering from water damage at this point. But Conker's Pocket Tales, which I feel like we've also spent a long time discussing. At least last year we did, what with the 20th anniversary and all. Conker's Pocket Tales is, it's an interesting game. I mean,
it's kind of become intertwined in DK Vine's identity at this point, which is
it has.
one
it's
of the
one of those games,
things to
it's one of those games we hold up and celebrate for how absurd it is. And I realize the Conker franchise is known for its absurdity, but Conker's Pocket Tales is a different blend of absurd than Bad Fur Day onward. I think one of the reasons we love Pocket Tales is that Bad Fur Day would have less meaning, skewing our perception and bucking norms as it does without that one release where Conker is like a surface level cutesy platformer franchise.
It's a bizarre look into the alternate dimension where they stuck with the original vision for Conker too, which is
but it also
feeds into, again, our theme of portable titles being like the off-kilter releases, but this being a particularly extreme case.
Yeah, it's a handheld counterpart to a game that was ultimately never released, or never released in the form that they intended it to be. But I think it works as a prequel to Bad Fur Day. I know Chris Seaver and co. would disavow that, but to me, it's kind of the perfect setup for the punchline of Bad Fur Day.
It absolutely is, because I think it makes the comedy of Conker's like depraved adulthood land a bit more, knowing that he used to be the sweet kid who just wanted to have his goddamn birthday.
And you know, it's kind of implied at the end of the game that he and Barry fall in love, and knowing how toxic that relationship eventually was, which led to death and misery. It adds just this dark comedy to the end of Pocket Tales, where you defeated the evil acorn, and now this squirrel and chipmunk will live happily ever after. Except that's not what happens at all. Just less than 2 years from now, it's all gonna go to hell. I mean, Pocket Tales, it isn't the finest game, and when you look at like the talent involved with that, like you look at what Pocket Tales tried to do. I think eventually Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is Pocket Tales done right. Not that Pocket Tales is really a bad game, it's just kind of there. And so few rare games are ever just there, you know?
I'd say it's got some, like, I'd say it's a very, like, I'm trying to think of a way to put this tactfully. It's a very interesting game, and the things holding it back are just things like health pickups being like a one-time collectible, and just very minor issues, but unfortunately ones that permeate the entirety of the game.
But it's so fucking interesting.
But it's
Cameron.
so cool. Yeah, it never stops giving you things to dissect about it.
The fact that there are two versions of the same game on one cartridge, and they are substantially different it's like, how many times do you get that? I feel like you've got like a Game Boy port to a Game Boy game within this Game Boy game.
And, I mean, we talk about the tonal relationship versus Bad Fur Day, but it's also just a fascinating game in that Pocket Tales itself, it gives you tonal whiplash all over the place. Like, oh, it's a game about getting your birthday presents back. Oh, wait, somebody just got shot and died. Now you're building a boat. Oh, no, somebody's going to blow up a cave with a bomb.
Well, yeah, Evil Acorn too. Yeah, he's not just like, we revere that character because he straight up says he's going to kill Barry.
If you don't win a boat race.
If you don't win the boat race, he's going to slit her throat? Like it's like they don't even sugarcoat it. It's just like, whoa, like the tonal whiplash is severe. And yeah, it's like not a great game, but it's also, I can think of few games that are more just intriguing to me than Pocket Tales. I feel like there's a Simpsons quote, and I'm not one to really go to the well of Simpsons quotes, but it reminds me of the episode where Marge sees a therapist and she talks about the trauma of being a little girl who loved the band The Monkees, and she got called out on the fact that they didn't write their own songs at the time. And the therapist says, the Monkees weren't about music, Marge. They were about rebellion, about political and social upheaval. And I feel like that's Pocket Tales for me. It's not about the gameplay, Cameron. It's about the political upheaval. I love it. And I also love Camelot's sporting Mario RPGs, which, again, I've talked so much about Mario Golf for Game Boy Color recently that I feel like I don't need to. And I think that illustrates how much handheld games mean to me, that so much of the conversation is always about them and what they do. But the Game Boy Advance was really where I feel like handheld gaming came into the mainstream, and it wasn't just a kid's toy anymore. I remember reading articles around the time of the Game Boy Advance SP, which was the sleeker model of the Game Boy Advance I think most people remember now, where it was clamshelled and you flipped it open and it had an actual backlight to it. And it was just like all these things that were holding the Game Boy platform back for years and years and years were finally resolved. And you had this killer handheld system all of a sudden. And I remember reading articles about how like businessmen who were always traveling had been buying Game Boy Advance SPs and playing them on planes as a way to kill time. And it was suddenly this like sleek, sophisticated toy for the jet setting crowd. And it was no longer this thing relegated to playgrounds and elementary school cafeterias. And I think that was really the turning point. It was a turning point for gaming in general, because that's when like the original generations were coming of age, and that's when, you know, like college students and older were still playing video games, and then everybody started realizing, oh wait, video games aren't just something you grow out of. It's actually going to be around, you know, as people age. So the Game Boy Advance really was at the forefront of all of that, and riding off of Pokemon Mania. But, you know, Nintendo was just killing it with the Game Boy Advance. This is really, I look back at this generation of Nintendo and I realize, like, I didn't play my GameCube nearly as much as I played the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, the Game Boy Advance was another system that it did feel like it was relevant forever. And I mean, it's one of the few systems where I like bought multiple models of it, because I did buy the SP when it came out. I remember the original Game Boy Advance I have is, it's the model they released. I forget what they call it, but it's the magenta one. Because just the stores were sold out of them for months upon months, and that was the only model people had because they were just too self-conscious about having a pink system. But I traded up because I got fed up with not being able to see the screen, and also it had just been scratched all to hell because I was a child, and it was very easy to damage that thing. Which is partly why the Game Boy Advance SP is one of my favorite pieces of hardware Nintendo's ever put out in terms of design and aesthetics. The only drawback is it doesn't have the headphone jack, which I guess they beat Apple to that game by years upon years. That's not an original thought, but even to this day, I just really like the kind of like bulky flip phone aesthetic to it. I think it's like a very sleek looking handheld.
Yeah, I keep using the term sexy, but that's really, I think, when the Game Boy became hot to trot. It was something that you could put in your pocket without scratching anything up. And I own the original Game Boy Advance. I got it in 2001, I think, like 2 weeks before 9/11. And I'm not bringing that up to be glib. I just remember it was like right before 9/11, because I remember it was just like how like quiet the world felt right before. And I remember getting that with Mario Kart Super Circuit. And then
the game Advance Wars came out the day before 9/11.
Ooh, yeah. And, you know, it was great. But I remember thinking at the time, God, I wish there was a backlight to this, because it just feels like the third iteration of Game Boy, they would have offered that. It was frustrating to have to like angle yourself in the light still.
What made it even worse was that it was, I mean, and this was a good thing, but it had a major drawback. It was backwards compatible and would let you play original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but it would render them even darker than the Game Boy Color screen did. I remember specifically playing either Pokemon Gold or Silver and going into one of those caves where you have to use Flash to see anything.
Yeah.
And I used Flash and looking at my screen and I'm thinking to myself, I still can't see anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like walking through Torchlight Trouble without getting out squawks. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, but then I owned two SPs. I remember I owned the silver one and I owned the black one. And
I had the metallic blue one, which I think most of them were metallic.
Yeah, I mean I still have it on my desk here. I love the hell out of this thing. I don't get like super nostalgic for like, oh, I wish they would have kept this going somehow, but I really wish they, like, the DS, I held an irrational grudge against the DS. I think more subconscious than at the forefront, but I was angry at it for displacing and supplanting the Game Boy Advance SP. I felt like they could have kept that going for several more years. And you said it felt like it lasted a long time.
You brought up the Virtual Boy as a third pillar. They did market the DS as a third pillar for months after it came out,
but
before kind of silently admitting it never was.
Yeah, and there was only, you mentioned how long the Game Boy Advance lasted. It was only 4 years between release and the release of the DS.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it felt like an eternity, and that partially that was just the output, and I think how much the system resonated in the popular culture at the time. I mean, you had Sony, based on the success of the SP, chasing it with their own handheld, and you know we had talked for years like, is Xbox going to start, you know, the X-Boy or something? exploitdungeon.com.
Which, if I remember right, was like a reason giving why Rare had a handheld team for so long, just kind of biding time for when Microsoft surely would have entered the console market and just never did.
Well, that's a good segue into why the Game Boy Advance. I think out of all of Nintendo's handhelds, why the Game Boy Advance will always mean the most to DK Vine. And that is because the Game Boy Advance was sort of the life raft when the buyout happened and everything we knew and held dear was kind of cast to the sea. The Game Boy Advance allowed us to still have Rare games on a Nintendo platform. And not only that, but we also had newcomers like Payon in the mix, giving us Donkey Kong games. It's so funny to me from the perspective of Hyle Russell, year 2020, looking back at how, like, even a decade ago, I viewed the buyout era, the so-called buyout era, which was 2003 to 2010, roughly, that era of the Donkey Kong universe as like the darkest time. Just the worst time to be a fan of the Donkey Kong universe, because it really wasn't when you look at the output. Yeah, when you look at the games we were getting and the volume of games we were getting, you would, if you weren't privy to all the behind the scenes drama and the uncertainty of the era, you would view that as a golden age.
Oh yeah, like I feel like I remember at the time, like, loading up, because I only found out about the Rare Microsoft buyout by going to Rare's website and meeting a welcome page with Cameo on it saying, like, now a part of Microsoft Game Studios. Wait, what? Like, I remember thinking at the time, like, oh no, like, I'm a child who can't afford to, or / convince his parents to have more than one console in the house. I guess I'm just never going to play Rare games for quite some time. And no, the Game Boy Advance let me keep up with them for quite some time.
Yeah, so they were purchased by Microsoft in September of 2002, and yet they released games for Nintendo platforms up through Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise. Pocket Paradise was September 8th, 2008. So it was like 6 years. We still got rare titles on Nintendo handhelds. And like that's over a half a decade. Like it really did help keep us sane because, now, we're fine with Rare, or like most of us are fine with Rare being part of Xbox Studios because we got output like Rare Replay and Sea of Thieves, and we're all looking forward to Everwild, and we got Battletoads and the promise that, they could work with other studios to bring back, classic IPs. And everything is going swimmingly. Plus, we have the Rare alum at Playtonic giving us, old school flavored games like, what Rare used to make. And, everybody's kind of like happy with the arrangement. We've reached this nice Zen-like peace. But the buyout era really was a time of uncertainty and rumors, and just, it was kind of like more anxiety than anything, and then things didn't help, like that mistranslated interview vis-a-vis Jungle Beat, and thinking that like there was some sort of vendetta against the Rare characters that Nintendo still owned, but
which we probably should have called into question considering how heavily they were still marketing Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3 on GBA.
Yeah, which were made by Rare. So, like, the Game Boy Advance at this time, we got the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy in these remake versions, which, a lot of people, this was their gateway to Donkey Kong Country. And I know that fans, purists of the original Super Nintendo versions, have problems with them, as do I, but there's something to like out of all three of them, I would say. And at the very least, it's still like the gameplay is preserved. Yeah, the backgrounds might be lighter. They might have like butchered the tonal atmosphere of some of the environments and climatic scenes, but it's still Donkey Kong Country 2.
Yeah, I think it's to some extent like a Star Wars Special Edition effect where if you've seen the originals, you'll notice the changes and it might grate the hell out of you. But if you're just coming into this for the first time, this is the only version of these games that has ever been accessible to you, you're probably less likely to notice.
And honestly, it's kind of a reverse special edition now, because now I kind of wish they would give us the option of making the Game Boy Advance versions, available on some sort of platform, because they've done pretty well about keeping the Super Nintendo versions available in some form or fashion through successive consoles and virtual consoles and Nintendo Switch Onlines. But the Game Boy Advance versions, they came out on the Game Boy Advance, and then that was it. It would be nice to kind of have those also in the mix.
For that matter, since we didn't talk about it before, I wanted to throw a nod to the original Game Boy Advance release of Donkey Kong Country felt a little bit weird at the time because it was immediately hot on the heels of the pre-buyout Game Boy Color version of Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah. So that's a weird case because Nintendo at the same time was putting the Super Mario Brothers / World lineage like on the handhelds, and they did Super Mario Brothers on the Game Boy Color as like Super Mario Brothers Deluxe or something. Was that the name of it?
Oh yeah, that was absolutely it. Super Mario Brothers Deluxe. It's aside from the fact that you have less screen real estate, it's a very good version of that game to own with a myriad of stuff added to it.
What was it, like the Super Mario Brothers All-Stars like remake of it?
Not really. It still had the NES graphics like in actual gameplay, but it added stuff like a map screen kind of logically connecting all the levels you went to. It had a like time attack mode / like level remix where you raced Boo. There was a mode where you had to find a Yoshi egg in each level.
Yeah.
It had, just like Donkey Kong Country GBC did, a Game Boy printer functionality, which I guess DKC GBC, if I can go off on a tangent, like that is the most memorable Game Boy Color output from Rare for that system for me, or at least or even just Donkey Kong universe in general. But it is like weirdly locked in time, and kind of weird that it exists when you look at the broad scope of the catalog in hindsight.
Sure.
Because
yeah.
It's got the Game Boy printer features. It's weird that it exists so close to the Game Boy Advance, and I think in a weird way it's evocative of this trend that happened on the Game Boy Color, like to more than just Donkey Kong Country, where you started to see a lot of really like oddly ambitious attempts at porting a game that was on hardware that far exceeded the constraints of what the Game Boy Color was capable of. Like there was a port of Resident Evil 2 on Game Boy Color. There was a remake of Dragon's Lair, not like a reimagining as like a traditional platformer. I mean like the Laserdisc game, like cutscenes and all, on Game Boy Color. Yeah. And I think DKC GBC kind of fell into that odd category, and it's a very fascinating game to look at because of that.
It's in some ways more fascinating than the Game Boy Advance version of it, because it felt more like a Donkey Kong Land title, but with just the Donkey Kong Country stages, than the Game Boy Advance version, which actually did feel like Donkey Kong Country. But yeah, it's weird because, Nintendo then continued on from Super Mario Bros. Deluxe with Super Mario Bros. Advance, which was a remake of the US Super Mario Bros. 2. But then they did Super Mario Advance 2, which was Super Mario World, right? And then they did Super Mario Advance 3, which was that Yoshi's Island?
3 was Yoshi's Island, and 4 was Super Mario 3. That's the confusion. And I should say that as a kid whose Super Nintendo came bundled with a copy of Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World, it was pretty darn distracting to me when I noticed, well, wait a minute, all these Super Mario Advance games are just them parting out Super Mario All-Stars and charging you more for it.
Yeah, people have a problem with, oh wait, this Wii U game you're selling it for $60 on the Switch. You get used to it. Like,
and granted, they did add more features, the e-reader functionality in Super Mario 3. The world had made Luigi like a more distinct character from Mario, but it was always just in the back of my mind thinking I know where these graphics are from. You didn't remake this all over again.
Yeah, so Nintendo, though, they didn't port Super Mario Brothers twice, but Rare did redo Donkey Kong Country twice, because rather than just picking up with Donkey Kong Country 2 on the Game Boy Advance, they went back and did Donkey Kong Country again, and that was less than 4 years. That was just like a little over 3 years between the release of the two. But this was also post buyout. And so I feel like I've still never gotten a clear answer as to why they pushed to do Donkey Kong games, other than they could. And there's well, we can still make money from Donkey Kong if we do this. So I don't know for sure, but my theory is that there was a contingent at Rare who were they still very much wanted to do Donkey Kong games because they were always so profitable. And maybe they did have a little bit of, proprietorship, they felt like these are our characters, we still need to engage with this world if we can. So that was their route. They had a handheld. That's how they justified it to Microsoft, and obviously Nintendo let them. They made 4 Donkey Kong games, counting Diddy Kong Racing DS, in this time period.
I mean, it's a venture that's profitable for every party involved, with no issue of competition, so it makes perfect sense, even if at the time it was bit of a shot.
People don't realize that, yeah, Nintendo owns Donkey Kong Country, but there are things in, I don't know if it's like the things in the code for the games, or if it's just like out and out like references like Killer Instinct in DKC2.
Yeah,
but
Cranky outright saying, I'm going to play Killer Instinct.
Yeah, there are things in all of the Donkey Kong Country games that Rare does own, even if they don't own the characters or the game or whatever. It's complicated, but they have to work out an arrangement every time they put the Donkey Kong Country games on things like Nintendo Switch Online. And Microsoft has always been, on board with that. They've never like sought to like keep that from happening, because why would they? I mean, there's no reason for that. So, which, gives me hope. Maybe one day we'll get Diddy Kong Racing back in some form, even though that is owned by Rare. Although Nintendo does own certain things like, Diddy Kong and Diddy Kong Racing, the title. But, anyway, so yeah, the thing about the Game Boy Advance Donkey Kong Country trilogy, besides being the gateway for a new generation of gamers, like a decade removed from the original Super Nintendo versions, they were, I think, the most profitable Donkey Kong games in that decade. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember we were obsessed with this on the DK Vine forum back then. Like, what was selling the best?
I mean,
and
it makes perfect sense just based on the audience, the consumer base for the Game Boy Advance, really.
Yeah, and I don't think it's really a slight against Jungle Beat, although we certainly tried to make it into that at the time. Jungle Beat was always going to have an uphill climb because it was tied to the bongo peripheral.
Yeah. It was an expensive game that required a peripheral that was on a system that was, I don't know if it was ahead of the Xbox, but it was certainly behind the PlayStation 2 in popularity. Yeah. Everything was. Yeah,
so the Donkey Kong Country remakes were always going to be positioned to do better than even the big console iteration of Donkey Kong. But I do know, through secondhand knowledge, that the success of the Game Boy Advance games really, convinced Nintendo to go back to the Donkey Kong Country rather than to try to reinvent Donkey Kong yet again. And so that's how we eventually got Donkey Kong Country Returns. So, although Rare did want to make Donkey Kong Country 4 based on the success of the first three, they wanted to make Donkey Kong Country 4 for the DS, or at least the handheld team pushed for it. But Nintendo at that point was already making plans to do returns in some form.
And I can understand that decision, because obviously while the pedigree of Rare is important, I can also see the logic of, you're going to make a title as big and notable as a Donkey Kong Country 4. You want it to be on your flagship console hardware, like the originals were.
And ultimately, as much as a Rare zealot, a cult member, fanatical Kool-Aid drinker, Flavor Aid drinker as I am, and that's absolutely the right call. You don't want to tether this property to a studio that's owned by your competition. You're going to have to bring it closer to in-house and make it your own, even if it's with, Retro Studios who, you own outright. But, it just doesn't make sense to have Rare do it, and because it can only do it for your handheld systems.
And it certainly would have caused problems if they still had the keys to the kingdom when Rare's handheld team shuttered.
Yeah. So, absolutely the right call on Nintendo, but we might not have gotten Donkey Kong Country Returns without those games, and who knows what state the Donkey Kong series would be in today. It might not. It might have gone the way of the F-Zero or all these other Nintendo franchises, even Star Fox, where you might get a new game, but who knows? It's just kind of in perpetual limbo. I know it feels like Donkey Kong's in limbo to a large number of people right now. Donkey Kong is not in limbo right now. But besides the remakes, it would have been one thing if we just got the remakes, which were pretty cool, but we got new product too. We got new product from. This is the coolest thing about what we're going to talk about next. It's a Japanese studio that were big fans of Rare's Donkey Kong. And so we got to see a lot of familiar characters and concepts brought back, resurrected by a team outside of Rare, which we still really haven't seen since. And that's, Peon's, well, I guess King of Swing is the only one on the Game Boy Advance, but it set the stage for another game on DS, and then, well, a game on the Wii, but we won't be talking about that. DK King of Swing.
Yeah, DK King of Swing I could go on and on about, but I will just say it succinctly. This is the game that got me back into Donkey Kong. After I became a lapsed fan of Donkey Kong, because after the Rare buyout, and I just didn't expect to be playing many Donkey Kong games for a while, I did what my thought process was that of a healthy person who doesn't hang out on DK Vine all the time. And I moved on and became a fan of other things because I just figured I wasn't going to get any Donkey Kong output in a while, so why obsess over it? And then I found out about DK King of Swing as this game that brought back so many of these old characters and even really obscure ones. The bats in DK64 didn't even have a name, and they got one in King of Swing because they were in it.
Flip Flap, yeah.
Yeah. And also just, as you said, it was one of the first times, I say one of, because Congo was already out at this point, one of the first glimpses we saw of Rare's Donkey Kong through the lens of a Japanese developer. And they did it in a very cool way, because it was also one of the first times we'd seen Rare's Donkey Kong in a different style other than either their ACM graphics or someone else deliberately trying to replicate their ACM. And I think it's still one of the coolest and most distinct looking Donkey Kong titles because of that.
There is a sort of a debate in the fandom about which is better, King of Swing or Jungle Climber. And, for the longest time, I assumed everybody thought Jungle Climber is better. Lately, I've been seeing more King of Swing fans saying, I like King of Swing better than Jungle Climber. But I think the art style of King of Swing has definitely resonated more than Jungle Climber over the years. Not to say one's better than the other, but one is definitely more unique than the other, especially when it comes to Donkey Kong. And you definitely kind of want to see more characters done in this style, because it shows that you can take Rare's World of Donkey Kong and make it different. You can make it different while still staying true to its essence. It doesn't have to be ACM. It can be more cartoony while still being true to itself. And it was really exciting to see, oh my God, there's Wrinkly. Wrinkly's in it, and she's still a ghost. Because that was a huge win for us that Donkey Kong's mom was still dead. Because it showed that Rare is not making this, but they're still holding true to the canon that Rare set.
There was just so much in that game. Candy Kong is in it for the sake of being in it. She's not a playable character. She doesn't say anything or really do anything except walk on screen and clap her hands, but she's there because a scene called for all of the Kongs to gather around and have a scene together. So she's just there, and her tent's on the map screen because it's the Congo jungle.
Yeah, I think, and that's a very Rare kind of philosophy too, is, with retro, we've seen it that philosophy where, well, we're not going to bring in a character if there's no purpose for that character to serve in the game. Whereas Rare is work them in. We want to see these characters. We'll just use a character for this. We'll use a character for that. And we'll just have a character on the side here in the background. Yeah. And Pam got that.
I think the most evocative version of that was DK64. They needed a spirit guide character, so they killed Wrinkly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember like King of Swing, it was announced at E3 2004 alongside Jungle Beat. And I remember like initially, even from DK Vine, I remember like Chad's initial article was very dismissive and kind of like making fun of it. And it was like later in the day where I was like really looking into it, and I was like, wait a second, this game looks kind of interesting. It reminded me a similar event back when Rare was still with Nintendo, coconut crackers. I remember thinking like, coconut crackers, this is weird, but the more I thought about it, the more I really dug the idea of just getting weird with Donkey Kong. And you could do that on the Game Boy. You could do that on the Game Boy Advance, right? You could get a little weird with Donkey Kong.
Yeah, and to be sure, like the initial pitch for DK King of Swing to your audience in an era where they're wondering if they're ever going to get original Donkey Kong Country titles ever again. It's a weird sell. It's a high concept game, like a game where you basically only use the shoulder buttons and the A button occasionally in the D-pad if you want, and every stage is a vertical climb. It's obvious, like right off the bat, it's just kind of telling you, oh, this isn't what you're looking for, but hear me out, you still might want to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and I don't know how well King of Swing did. It obviously did well enough for a sequel, but it was kind of like a sleeper hit, maybe.
I remember at the time feeling, again, this was just also me being an angry teenager in general on DK Vine back in the day. I felt like it was severely undermarketed.
Oh, it was.
And I don't know how much that carved into its sales. Oh, I would also say the same of Jungle Climber.
Yeah, they were always just kind of like, they existed, they showed up in stores, but they weren't really, like, you never saw commercials for them or anything. They were just there. And it was always also weird because it never felt like...
They got print advertisements, and I think that was the most severe marketing I ever saw them get.
Yeah, we've often brought them
in
up.
America,
it's like,
anyway, they had Japanese commercials. Sorry to keep interrupting.
That's okay. We brought it up though, like it was like having side games without a main game. Like Jungle Beat was the main console game of that era of the GameCube, but because that was already so wildly different, it felt like there was nothing to really. I
mean, we saw the extreme end of this with the reception to Nuts and Bolts. Really, this is like the lesser version of that controversy.
Yeah, and I think that's why handheld games are important, because you can get weird with handheld games. You can get less weird with console games, or at the very least, the public will be less receptive to it. So there's really no momentum to ride off of for King of Swing and Jungle Climber at the time for the Donkey Kong series. The Donkey Kong series was kind of having an identity crisis in the Game Boy Advance era, and that was abundant with Mario vs. Donkey Kong, the other big series that started up around this time. That started off as more of an arcade throwback and quickly spiraled into its own thing. But that original game on the Game Boy Advance was very much styled as like a direct sequel to the arcade games. Donkey Kong 94, it was originally going to be like Donkey Kong Plus, and then after the buyout, they decided to use the modern Donkey Kong in it and actually made it look a little bit like ACM graphics.
I mean, to be sure, it's evocative of the time when DK's identity wasn't certain, because the game itself doesn't seem particularly certain itself.
It doesn't seem like it particularly cares one way or another.
Like I think we've heard as much that like the development team essentially considered it like, oh, it's the arcade Donkey Kong, but he's using the modern model. He's got Grant Kirkhope's voice. His identity is functionally irrelevant. It honestly, the controversy of it doesn't matter because it's not what Mario vs. Donkey Kong is about, which is weird for a game that's Mario vs. Donkey Kong in the title, but...
My feelings are well known about it. And I don't want to besmirch Gibbon or anything.
He is in our chat, and I don't want to be too mean. And the first Mario vs. Donkey Kong game, I will say, is a very fun game. If I can set aside any baggage I am carrying about it.
The thing is, I wish they would have gone all in on the concept and actually had it be the Mario franchise versus the Donkey Kong franchise, rather than just Donkey Kong in Mario in a Mario game and serving as the antagonist. Although, you know, they always patch it up at the end. Like, they make sure to preserve any status quo of them being frenemies, where either leaning in on the friend aspect of that.
I think that is an issue you kind of run into, where Nintendo or one of their teams might want to revisit the Donkey Kong arcade concept, taking inspiration from its gameplay design. But the thing is, both those franchises have moved on in their continuity and story, but they're not going to rebrand it as something else either, so you end up with this sort of weird backtrack step for both of them.
I find it interesting, though, we haven't gotten a new entry in this series in a long, long time. And, I mean, relatively long, considering how often they were turning them out. And I think that there is more careful consideration being done these days towards things like Donkey Kong's identity and the brand integrity. Like, maybe we shouldn't have Donkey Kong being the adversary to Mario and all these side games, while at the same time promoting things like Donkey Kong Country Returns. Yeah. And not to say they won't revisit that in the future, but I think there is more thought being put into that these days than there were back in 2004.
I'm sure it's probably a thought of, hey, you know, if we're trying to market this Donkey Kong Country game, maybe we shouldn't also market the game where he's a thief trying to bash Mario's head in.
Yeah, I this era, like, they were really throwing everything at the wall with Donkey Kong. They're like, okay, Rare's no longer like the driving force behind Donkey Kong, but we'll let them make some Donkey Kong games. Payon, you come over here, you do what you want. We're gonna make these bongo games. Namco, help us with that. Also, let's go back to the arcade era. Like, it was just like, what? There's a little bit of something for everyone, though, so that was kind of cool, you know, in retrospect. That was kind of cool.
Something for everyone.
Before we move on, I would be remiss to discuss, I think, one of my favorite aspects, absolutely my favorite aspect of the Game Boy Advance era, and that was what Rare also did, which were releasing spin-off games on the Game Boy Advance. We got Banjo-Kazooie Grunny's Revenge. That is the most notable one, I think, as far as the general populace is concerned. And Grunny's Revenge is just a brilliant game. I think it's brilliant. I think it is. Well, I talked about Impossible Lair being Pocket Tales done to perfection, at least, you know, the overworld of Pocket Tales. But Grunny's Revenge was also a great, like, top-down game.
It is impressive the degree to which it translates the console Banjo-Kazooie experience to a handheld, I have to say. And it's really
one of the last times we see that, where we see, like, a console experience pared down for a handheld and done so in such a, like, brilliant way. And I also, Grunny's Revenge is fucking bonkers. The plot is so weird. It involves time travel back to 1978. We meet a young Mumbo Jumbo. We meet young versions of a couple characters.
And Honeybee just hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, where, like, Honeybee is retconned into being in their, like, mid-40s at the very least in Banjo-Tooie. But we understand, like, the lore of Spiral Mountain and the Jinjos a little bit more, and the Church of Jiggy Wiggy. And it's just this amazing lore dump that you would never get in the main console games. And it's just like, oh, you really want to understand Banjo-Kazooie? You got to play Grunny's Revenge. And that was the one THQ actually marketed and pushed and made sure it was in stores. And then there was everything else.
I don't even know if I'd give them credit for marketing Grunty's Revenge, because I didn't know that game was out until I saw it on the shelf.
There were magazine ads for that.
Okay.
For THQ, that was pretty good. They spent some money promoting Grunny's Revenge. It's Mr. Pants, on the other hand. Like, I never saw that in stores. I ordered it on eBay from a seller on the border with Canada. I think they were close to, like, they were either, like, on the New York side of Niagara Falls or the Canadian side of Niagara Falls.
If I weren't so invested in DK Vine so as to know this not to be true, It's Mr. Pants would come off like an urban legend to me, because it is a game I feel that I have never seen. I would only see it in stores like years after it came out used. I don't think I ever saw a new boxed copy.
I'm just amazed you saw it in stores used. I've never.
I feel pretty certain about this, or at least it's my theory, that it was never distributed locally where I am, but perhaps people who moved from out of state traded in their old games, and that's how it would end up in local stores in the like used case.
Yeah, it's like when you go into a grocery store or a convenience store in another state and you see like these flavors of M&Ms that are nowhere near where you like what they have, like, marshmallow s'mores M&Ms now, like, well, since when? And it's just something they're testing out in certain regions and markets. I felt like It's Mr. Pants was that, like, okay, we're gonna test out this weird Game Boy Advance flavor called It's Mr. Pants, but we're only going to do it in like upper New York, maybe the Great Lakes region. Yeah, let's see how this does. It is probably one of the most obscure Game Boy Advance games to ever get a Western release, and I love it. Like, it's my favorite puzzle game of all time. It's a puzzle game made by Rare, and made by Rare in like the mid-aughts, and it's, you know, it has roots in, you know, it was really announced as a Donkey Kong game, Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers. We just found out today, Paul Makachek just tweeted this old, like, what was it, like, internal pitch or something for it.
And the most striking thing about this, which as Chad kind of calls attention to in one of his replies, is all of the reasons for pitching this as a Donkey Kong game kind of just amount to Donkey Kong is marketable and a flexible property. Mm-hmm. And we're used to working in Donkey Kong's universe. It's a weird fit for the puzzle game, and I don't necessarily think that Mr. Pants is any more logically a fit, but it gives the game a sense of identity it otherwise wouldn't have, because it is such an abstract concept.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely
makes it, I think, such a strong game.
You know, when I look at the Game Boy Advance releases that were announced pre-buyout and then had to be changed post-buyout, I miss Diddy Kong Pilot. I do not miss Coconut Crackers, because to me, It's Mr. Pants is the superior take on it.
How many website mascots get their own game?
Yeah, and it's so fucking bizarre, and but you get immersed in the absurd world of Mr. Pants, this like underwear model / designer / international celebrity who is just beloved by all people and has a whole community built up in his image called Pantsland.
And he sings to you, and he has a sweet, innocent light bulb friend, and it's...
He's taught a mouse how to surf, because that's what he does in his spare time. He also built a homemade rocket, and he shot him and his illegitimate son, Toby, to the moon, where they met an alien, and they named that alien Pluto Pants, and they stuck a pair of red briefs on his head. And now they're friends, and it's somehow the most depraved and yet most wholesome game I've ever played. And Yeah, and it's a puzzle game, and I don't normally go for puzzle games, but the fact that they like pull you into this world of Mr. Pants and you understand his world a little bit more each time you clear a puzzle. I mean, it's fantastic. I think it is one of my favorite Game Boy Advance games. It is one of my favorite handheld games ever. And however we got it, I'm glad we got it. And the fact that it is so rare, like, no pun intended, but the fact that it's like scarce and that not many people know about it, it's kind of like this secret thing between people in our community. I think that makes it all the more special to me. You know, I remember when the game came out and I made a Wikipedia article for Mr. Pants.
I remember this.
Yeah, and there were people, the Wikipedian, like, police, the Wikipedian, like, the people who really take Wikipedia seriously, right?
Yeah, remember when people took Wikipedia seriously?
They pegged the article for deletion. And they're like, this is not a noteworthy article. Why stop putting garbage on Wikipedia? And my response was, Mr. Pants is a video game character. Mr. Pants has his own video game. Mario has his own article. Mario has his own entry on Wikipedia. Why shouldn't Mr. Pants have his own article? You know, and Paul Makachek saw that at the time and commented on it when they did the "It's Mr. Pants" video to correspond with Rare Replay, not in Rare Replay, but released on a YouTube video. He brought up the Wikipedia wars that he bore witness to at the time. I still stand by it that Mr. Pants is just as valid and important as Mario. Yeah. And then there's also Banjo Pilot, Cameron.
There is also Banjo Pilot.
There's also Banjo Pilot.
Oh.
So I was crestfallen when they brought out the Nintendo DS because I got one, obviously, because I'm a consumerist whore, but I loved the SP. I thought there's so much more juice to get out of the SP. They could have kept that going into the new decade. Like that should, like, once they brought out the SP, like that could have been it. They could have rested on their laurels for years. And I was a little bit baffled why we had this new piece of technology, even though it was impressive. I was just like, but what about the SP? What about the Game Boy Advance? Why?
I mean, at that point, the PSP was also probably looming, so they had to come up with something.
Yeah, I know. Sony ruined it all. But the DS was pretty good, too. Although I have to say, I never had the emotional attachment I did to the Game Boy Advance SP. Like, I'm trying to think about, like, the games I loved. And obviously I love Jungle Climber, which we already mentioned, but we can bring up again. But I'm thinking, like, Mario Kart DS, right? That for me is what I always go to when I think about the DS, because I remember how frustrated I was with that game in so many ways.
It's a game that contains multitudes when you look at it from a Donkey Kong fan standpoint.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, it has the absolute most god-awful Donkey Kong model of any game ever on any platform.
Yeah, where he looks like he's been, like, attacked, by, like, a nerve gas produced by the Joker. Just like the permanent, like, rictus grin on his face, baring his teeth.
With a handful of teeth, because the texture depth of the DS just isn't that much.
Yeah, he looks like he's wearing those, like, those really cheap plastic Halloween fangs that always hurt your gums and, like, produce a god-awful amount of saliva when you pull them out, but...
And keeping in mind the DS resolution was so low that a lot of the time this just looked like an abstract, like, white blob with a red gum outline around his face constantly. It was definitely valuing Donkey Kong having a grin over it looking good at all, which was very strange.
This is when they thought, like, maybe Donkey Kong should always be grinning like he did on like the arcade imagery. Maybe you should always have like the big toothy grin, which became sort of a meme at DK Vine. You know, your toothy grin jackass Donkey Kong. That was like when Donkey Kong was at its like peak obnoxiousness during the buyout era. Versus if he wasn't showing his teeth, he was usually with Diddy, and they were like in this like genial, good-natured, sort of feel-good, laid-back moment. Versus him being this hypo aggro douche. But, Mario Kart DS also gave us the Rambi Rider at a time when we were starved, or thought we were starved, for references to Rare's Donkey Kong.
Which created the very surreal promotional image of the Jungle Beat Donkey Kong riding a car with Rambi's head grafted to it.
Yeah. And of course, that game also saw the short-term 2-game trend of just randomly sticking Donkey Kong's course on a ski resort. So that was another strike against it. It didn't have Diddy in it, which coming off of Double Dash felt like a huge downgrade.
In hindsight, they had to get that snow out of DK while they could before it all melted off the island.
And the thing I remember about Mario Kart DS, besides Waluigi Pinball, which is one of the greatest tracks in Mario Kart, and constantly getting blue shelled, is you had the emblem maker, where you could put your own custom emblem on the back of a cart. Which, oh man, I put the Rare logo, the actual current Rare logo of the era, like the early Xbox Rare logo, on the back of Donkey Kong's cart.
Oh, I did the exact same thing, and I like put it in like a dark blue bubble, like their old logo.
Okay. I didn't do the bubble. I just had the Rare logo, because there was an emblem maker online. Somebody made one where you could just stick any image in this, and it would create the gradient where you could then recreate it on your DS. You just follow along. So I did that with the Rare logo. Which was just like a JPEG I pulled off a Rare site. And so for me, it was great. I was like, Donkey Kong's representing Rare even in this game. Fuck yeah, fight the power.
And then Nintendo realized people might do something unsavory with this feature, and they never had it again.
Right, because most people who weren't little like angsty teenagers or early 20-somethings made penises. They just dicks. The game was full of dicks. But I'll always remember it in the positive for the Rare logo that I put in there. But, Jungle Climber, I think, is the highlight of the DS in a lot of people's mind, DKU fans' minds. And I would tend to agree. Jungle Climber took what King of Swing started, and it just got crazy with it, and it introduced, I think, one of the fan favorite characters of the post-Rare era of Donkey Kong, Xananab.
Yeah, Xananab stands out as, I think, like in the upper echelon of post-buyout characters that feel like characters Rare would have come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what was so magical of Payon, because you even look at what they did for Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, which the game is not well received generally, but aspects of it, like the characters, are. And you look at the original Kremlings they created for that game. People love them. People who know about them love them. And like even on my Twitter feed, I'm seeing all of these people who have characters like Calypso in their profile pic. And like Payon got, I think, something about Donkey Kong that even like Retro kind of failed to pick up on, like what translates for Donkey Kong fans. Like what kind of characters are they going to gravitate towards? There's a reason like Xananab is more highly revered than, say, Professor Chops.
Yeah. I mean, that's not to say there weren't things that Retro got that Payon didn't. This is still the era of the very genial Cranky Kong.
Yeah,
which I like hand wave away as you like.
Yeah, he mellowed out after Winkling died. No, I mean, of course, I feel like the humor of Cranky Kong didn't translate because it's such a Western stereotype of just the miserable old person, where I think in Eastern cultures they revere the elderly more, which is probably the healthier take and probably would lead to less cranky old people. But, you know, we can't erase generations of cultural strife overnight, people. So we're just going to have to go with it.
So yeah, Jungle Climber, I think now with the benefit of many years since, when in the evaluation between having to say which one do I prefer, King of Swing or Jungle Climber, I think nowadays I generally lean toward King of Swing, in part just because of my fondness for the art style and it just being it's the easier game to replay because it's very short. But at the time, and the thing that would make me totally understand if somebody's still vastly preferred Jungle Climber is the through the roof increase in ambition of that game.
Yeah.
Like, this was still in an era where we weren't getting a traditional Donkey Kong Country, and this game seems like almost mindful of that, in that it integrates a lot more of the sensibilities of a traditional Donkey Kong Country into King of Swing's formula. It brings back the DK and Diddy tag team, sort of. It makes Diddy kind of more of an extra, like, secondary hit like Retro's games eventually would. It makes Kong letters a collectible. It ups the pace of the game.
Brought back hero coins. It
had funky
DK coins. Funky, yeah.
With a gameplay function as, like, they revised it a little bit. Like, he takes you to a secret island instead of ferrying you across the map, because you can just take yourself across the map. Another thing Phaon eventually, I mean, at first got better than Retro did, but Retro kind of improved with Tropical Freeze. The map screen in Jungle Climber was one of the most impressive I think we'd seen at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just a fully 3D environment with a sprite Donkey Kong running around and jumping over it.
Yeah, it felt very much like a loving tribute to the series and what had come before. And I think it was so disheartening that the game kind of was so under-marketed and just kind of came and went without much fanfare. But like I said, when we were at MagFest in January, you know, in the before times when there were things like conventions.
This January.
Yeah, someone came up to me and talked about how, like, their Donkey Kong game was Jungle Climber. And I was like, mind blowing for me. But I was like, yeah, you know, if you had a Nintendo DS, if that was like all you had, and you had this game, that would define Donkey Kong for you. That was really cool for me, because as I've matured and stayed with DK Vine all these years, you get to see, like, how every Donkey Kong game can be somebody's first and, like, biggest experience in the series. So many people got in through the Game Boy Advance remakes, or, you know, the Phaon games, or Returns, or Tropical Freeze. And, you know, you can't sort of gatekeep, you know. No. It's like, no, you didn't start with Donkey Kong Country. You're not in your mid-30s. Fuck you. I'm a real Donkey Kong fan. That's ludicrous. I love that every game is someone's first, and that, you know, certain things mean more to other people than it does to me. I sincerely hope I will one day meet somebody whose favorite, most defining experience is Donkey Kong Country Barrel Maze, because that will be just, I think, the peak moment where I can finally transcend into the spiritual realm. I can leave my body behind and just become a being of pure energy once I meet that person. And of course, Rare released Diddy Kong Racing DS and Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise, which was kind of the handheld counterpart to Trouble in Paradise, and their final game for a Nintendo console, like, minus the input they've had with Banjo-Kazooie and Smash, I guess.
I feel a little bad that I can't speak in depth about Pocket Paradise, because I just did not play it at the time, and as I have 2 Viva Pinata games to complete that count for stamps and rare replay, I probably am unlikely to play it in depth anytime soon. But secondhand, I've heard that it is shockingly a very good way to experience a Viva Pinata game, like in the context of hardware at that point in time.
Yeah, I think it's...
With an original soundtrack by David Wise, I'll add as well. A different vibe from the Grant Kirkhope original. Yeah,
which was David Wise's last work on a Nintendo system until Tropical Freeze. It's I think, the more widely beloved over Diddy Kong Racing DS, although obviously Diddy Kong Racing DS did better. Sales-wise.
I mean, it was Diddy Kong Racing.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a reason in the pitch that Paul Makachek just tweeted this morning for, what was it, Donkey Kong Paint Puzzle? What was it called? What was the original name?
The fact that the name changed so often kind of speaks to how flimsy this
Puzzle
was.
Paint. Puzzle Paint. So the game was initially Animal Crackers for Game Boy Advance, just this unbranded title, and then they decided to make it Donkey Kong Puzzle Paint, which became Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers, which of course became its Mr. Pants. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Chris Seaver allegedly made more money in just the very little work he did on Donkey Kong 64, making sure it got out the door in time for the holidays in 1999. There's a reason he allegedly made more money for just that than he did the entirety of Bad Fur Day. And that's because the royalties for Donkey Kong are so much higher, because it's just, it is a very successful series. And I think a lot of like Nintendo diehards lose sight of how big Donkey Kong still is to this day. There was just a poll, like, what are they, like, the most widely known video game franchises? Super Mario was number 1. Donkey Kong was number 3. This isn't Nintendo. This was just video game franchises. Donkey Kong was number 3?
Which makes total sense to me, because, like, just in terms of cachet, Donkey Kong's name, like, you may not give the slightest care at all for the Donkey Kong series in terms of any of the games, or even like, not even like, do you like arcade, do you like country, do you like the pay-on games, like, you just do not care in the slightest about Donkey Kong. You know who Donkey Kong is.
Yeah. And I think there's never any confusion, right? If somebody mentions Crash, because people rarely say the full thing, Crash Bandicoot. If somebody references Crash, you're like, who crashed? What happened? Somebody references Kirby. It's like, Kirby's also a name, right? Like, no, I mean the gelatinous pink marshmallow who inhales people, Vor style. Like, what?
Oh, the vacuum.
But yeah, Donkey Kong, you reference Donkey Kong, you're only referencing one thing. Everybody knows what well, you could be referencing the father or the grandson, but no. Everybody knows Donkey Kong refers to a video game gorilla.
It's up there with Pac-Man.
It is. And except Donkey Kong has stayed relevant through reinvention and finding its own niche outside of the arcade era, where Pac-Man is still mostly known for Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man, which wasn't even a real Pac-Man game at the time. So of course Donkey Kong is number 3. And I think that's shocking to people. Even hardcore Donkey Kong fans don't realize how much Donkey Kong is still a big thing. And that's why they can't fathom that Nintendo is investing a lot of power and people and money into the IP at the moment. But it's happening, and that this is partly why, because not only does it have internal support, but everything Donkey Kong it has released that's actually, like, given a budget, given a marketing push, does very, very well. Even Tropical Freeze was just a victim of the Wii U. Everything was a victim of the Wii U, but you put Tropical Freeze on a Switch. Okay, now it's a huge hit. Okay, that makes sense. So, anyway, yeah, but the DS, Diddy Kong Racing DS, it was what it was. I'm glad it exists. I don't really have as many problems with it as other people do, and there's things it did that I really love, like Rare wasn't responsible for it. This is actually apparently a request from Nintendo, but it was the game that introduced the aged up Tiny Kong, the Tiny Kong who hit puberty, which I love. I love needless continuity. It's just
Diddy Kong Racing is DS is a mix of things that I wish they didn't do that kind of make it lesser than the N64 original, and a mix of things I really love that I would love to see like retroactively implemented in the original. The key thing I think above all is the 4 additional tracks they added, which are all set on Donkey Kong Island.
Which is so forgotten about. I remember we were talking with Chris Alcock about this, and he even forgot that this was even a thing. Like, it's just, there are 4 new tracks in Diddy Kong Racing DS set on Donkey Kong Island.
And it feels like such an important thing because, it makes Diddy Kong Racing feel like more of a Donkey Kong spin-off to have more of a Kong-centric presence in it. Along with Dixie and Tiny being in it, because Banjo and Conker couldn't. But also, it was significant for me at the time because I remember thinking Diddy Kong Racing was composed by David Wise, and it's one of his... It's like a very, in the context of the Donkey Kong series, at least, is a very different sound for him than I think most people are used to. More of like a pop song kind of rhythm to everything. And in setting these tracks on Donkey Kong Island, and with him still on composing duties, I remember thinking at the time, like, this could be the last time I ever hear David Wise composing a remix of DK King of Swing or Donkey Kong music ever, so I am going to enjoy the hell out of it.
Yeah. Another good Donkey Kong soundtrack a couple years earlier in a racing game was Banjo Pilot. A lot of good Donkey Kong songs on Banjo Pilot that inexplicably are still Donkey Kong songs in Banjo Pilot.
Monkey sounds and all, and one of them suspiciously sounding an awful lot like DK Island Swing, and another sounding suspiciously like the DK rap. But I feel like it kind of weirdly speaks to the chops of Jamie Hughes on that soundtrack and Robin Beanland. That it's a game that still doesn't sound, for the most part, except for the places where you can tell, like, obviously the monkey signs and the aforementioned like similar compositions. You can tell it's a game by composers who aren't Grant Kirkhope trying to match Grant Kirkhope's style back when it was a Donkey Kong game, and the fact that it translates so perfectly to a Banjo game kind of speaks to how well they were executing on that.
Yeah. It also works for me just how, like, for me, Banjo-Kazooie is a Donkey Kong spin-off. Rightly or wrongly, that's how I'll always view it. So I love that Banjo Pilot really just, like, leans into it a whole bunch, just by nature of its convoluted development cycle, and starting as a Donkey Kong game. It's fine. It works for me. Your mileage in the inexplicable plane that slows down whenever you hover above off track land, that may vary, but yeah, for me it's great. Before we move on from the DS, though, there is one other major title that we would be terrible podcast hosts if we didn't bring up. I, of course, am talking about Star Fox Command. And from this point on, I feel like this episode could have multiple endings, but all of them have to start with Star Fox Command because what a weird what a weird way to end Star Fox continuity.
Where's the one where we end the episode as Circuit Racers? I want to go for that one.
Okay. Which weirdly is how Han Solo ended up after the Star Wars trilogy, according to Force Awakens lore, he retired to become a racer, a race car driver or speeder racer or whatever. But just like, really? You didn't like help with the new government? Okay, well, this is why fascism started again. Yeah, Star Fox Command. Who even developed Star Fox Command? I always forget. Namco did Assault.
Q Games.
And then, what's that?
Q Games.
Q Games, okay.
Led by Dylan Cuthbert, who worked on the original Star Fox.
Okay. People hate this game. I feel like it gets an unfair reputation and rap because people get hung up on the multiple endings and how it just kind of definitively ends the Star Fox story in every one.
And my view on that is it only definitively ends the series if you aren't trying hard enough.
Yeah, people are people are weird about this sort of thing, right? Like for me, this prevents a tasty challenge. I don't know why I say it in such a creepy way, but it's like, ooh, how do we get out of this one? Like, this is fun, right? And other people are like, just fucking reboot it. They ruined it. And I'm like, whoa, calm down. This is interesting. This is an interesting challenge. I'm having fun with this. You had a great quote the other month where it said like
if I remember right, it was something like there are two kinds of people: the people who don't want Star Fox Command to be canon, and people who are cowards.
Yes, and I tweeted it immediately because I was like, yes, like say what you will about this game. My two favorite Star Fox games.
I misspoke that. Can I backtrack that?
I mean, it's your quote, so sure.
There are two kinds of people who want Star Fox Command to remain canon, and people who are cowards.
Yeah. So, like, Star Fox Adventures and Star Fox Assault are my two favorite Star Fox games. So I'm probably not your standard Star Fox fan, right? I liked Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, although it was a little beyond me when it came out. Star Fox 64, I played the hell out of through both rentals and eventual ownership. Star Fox Adventures, though, was I mean, it was basically Dinosaur Planet with Star Fox characters integrated. I loved it. Loved it. I think it gets an unfair reputation. It's in my top 10 games of all time. Fight me. I don't give a shit. It is, I love the world. I love the atmosphere. I love the characters. I love the story, which isn't convoluted if you're paying attention. It's no more convoluted than Lost or The Rise of Skywalker. You're just not paying attention. But, and actually it is the plot of Rise of Skywalker. It's the exact same damn thing where the defeated, deceased man antagonist has plotted his own resurrection and is pulling things behind the scenes and inciting this whole uprising.
You'll hear no argument for me. I was interested in Star Fox Adventures and ended up loving it specifically because I fell in love with the world of Star Fox 64, and I loved the stamp that Adventures put on it.
Star Fox Adventures started what we call the Dinosaur Planet trilogy, where it took Star Fox, which at that point, Star Fox 2 had never been officially released at that point. So we had Star Fox and we had Star Fox 64, which were essentially the same story. And what Star Fox Adventures did was it progressed the storyline. It said, okay, 7 years later, we're going to pick up with these characters. And they're down on the luck because what happens to these mercenary, air jockeys after they defeat the evil in the solar system?
It turns out, when you're a mercenary, ushering in a new era of galactic peace is really bad for your bottom line.
Yeah. And it's just a great story. And considering the amount of time they had to take this original plot they devised, Dinosaur Planet, which we're going to get into when we eventually do our Kongversation series on this. And it's going to be a series because it started off as a Diddy Kong Racing sequel with Timber the Tiger. This is why Tricky is the one element that is somehow hung on from when he was paired with Timber the Tiger as a Diddy Kong Racing sequel / spinoff into a Star Fox game, and yet Tricky, this Diddy Kong Racing boss character, is still there. But yeah, they had this original plot of Dinosaur Planet that had its origins in Diddy Kong Racing, got the Star Fox license grafted onto it, and yet they made it work. They somehow like blended it into the lore of the Lilat system and had Andros be the like the one pulling the strings behind everything. It worked. Like, if you didn't know the history behind Dinosaur Planet, it was like the plot was solid. I think people get hung up on what it wasn't.
It wasn't always a seamless transition, I think, but it didn't matter. It was an interesting direction to me.
And I think it enriched the Star Fox mythos substantially. So much of that Assault by Namco, because Namco like got a lot of Rare's cast-offs when the buyout happened. They made Donkey Konga and they made Star Fox Assault, and Assault kept pushing the story forward. It's like, okay, now Crystal has joined Team Star Fox, and Peppy is more in this advisory role on the Great Fox with Rob, and now there's going to be this extragalactic invasion by these insectoid creatures.
Starwolf is back, and Andrew and Pigma aren't on the team anymore.
We're gonna kill Pigma. We're gonna give Pigma the most horrific death imaginable. We're gonna introduce this new character in Starwolf. We're gonna have this kind of uneasy alliance between Wolf and Fox, and then this begrudging respect, and we're gonna leave things gray between them as the game ends. And we're gonna have General Pepper get horrifically injured over the course of the adventure.
We're gonna blow up the Great Fox.
Blow up the Great Fox. I mean, it was ballsy, and I love Star Fox Assault. Man, do I love Star Fox Assault. Star Fox Assault, if I have to pick like my favorite traditional quote-unquote Star Fox game, it's Assault. I love it so much more than 64. It is a great, great game. Fight me! But Star Fox Command then was like, okay, I see what Rare and Namco did. Now, hold my beer. It's like, we're just going to end it. We're just going to end the story.
Command is a very... The previous games advanced the passage of time. Yeah, well, what if we advance it so far that everybody is aged and decrepit?
But it picks up after Assault, and yet it doesn't like pick up the new status quo after Assault. It's like, okay, and then a couple years after that, the team's broken up again.
Yeah. Command is a game that I have very conflicted feelings about, because it's a mix of things I really, really love and things I kind of don't. And unfortunately, the kind of don't is the main gameplay conceit of it. The mostly all range mode timed strategy gameplay. The, I guess, lesser things that I don't especially care for are, I see a way out of the multiple endings, but I kind of don't love how final a lot of them are, because people took the wrong impression from it, which I can't hold against the game too much. There's one or two endings that leave you a perfectly good opening to continue the story. But just minor other things, like some of the cast are written a little bit out of character. The character designs I don't always care for. Particularly Fox's five head. But it also does a lot of things I do like. Continuing the story again. Kind of bringing back characters that even Assault didn't, like Bill and Kat. And even kind of bringing Pigma back, but establishing he's kind of like trapped in a living hell of his own making as this cosmic horror. in the form of a floating like Rubik's cube.
Yeah. Which was kind of a great callback to the graphics of the original Star Fox in its own way. Yeah, I can't say I hate Command. I kind of have this weird respect for it where I'm like, good for you. Good for you. You really went for it. And at the very least, right, considering where Star Fox trended after Command, maybe because of Command, but maybe it was always going to happen where they just remade Star Fox again, like Star Fox Zero. Like, hey, let's do it again. And then we eventually got Star Fox 2 on the mini NES, but and then Starlink, but I think that Command at the very least serves a purpose where it gives us, whether we want it or not, it does provide closure. Whatever closure you want to pick as your preferred closure, it's available to you in Command. Until we get an actual continuation, I'm fine having Command be the end of that trilogy of games where the lives and loves of Team Star Fox progressed and evolved and matured. I like it. I'm glad it exists. It keeps things interesting, you know?
If you can say nothing else about Command, you can't deny it's interesting.
Yeah. And we will do so much of Star Fox we have not done Kongversations on. And I think I've been waiting until we hit the 20th anniversary of Adventures to really start delving into it. But I have a lot to say about, like, the Dinosaur Planet trilogy, DKU, Star Fox, however you want to define these three games. But yeah, Command, what was the end of it? Like, it's weird because it feels like Star Fox is so removed from the DKU at this point. But from the end of the buyout era, or from the end of the spin-off era, from the era of when Nintendo and Rare were still working together, through the buyout era, Star Fox was this, like, major pillar of the DKU.
And yet they kind of did the opposite thing where I suggested, well, if you make a new Donkey Kong Country, you wouldn't put it on the handheld. The final say on Star Fox continuity for the time being is a DS game.
Yeah. So yeah, the 3DS, which was announced, was it 2010?
Not really.
I think it was right around the time Donkey Kong Country Returns was announced, because I remember the goddamn Jimmy Fallon episode with Reggie where they played Donkey Kong Country Returns and Jimmy Fallon was, like, struggling to find things to talk about.
Yes, March 2010, just looked it up.
Okay, so right before Returns was announced, but then they also Reggie plugged the 3DS, and I just remember Jimmy Fallon's glib, like, bland comments he would make. We were all, like, watching this episode of Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, just because Donkey Kong was going to be on it, and then my power went out, and I had to watch it on, like, this old black and white portable TV with an antenna. And I'm, like, sitting in the dark, like, trying to get good reception on like, terrestrial television, watching Jimmy Fallon at, like, 12:30 in the morning.
It's a good thing we're on the episode about portable, non-discernible displays.
I thought you were making a comment about Jimmy Fallon's flask. So the Nintendo 3DS, I associate it with Donkey Kong Country Returns, both because of that episode, and also because, for me, the defining game of the 3DS was a port of a Wii game.
I remember for a long time, it was there was this mystery of, we knew, like, a Donkey Kong game was definitely going to happen on the DS, or at least felt like it was a certainty because of that early promotional video they did close to the announcement where they had, like, CG objects coming out of a 3DS, and one of them was a series of DK barrels. And that kind of got our imaginations to, like, what are they going to do? Is it going to be a new Donkey Kong Country? Are they going to port Donkey Kong Country Returns. What is this about? Why is this here?
The big rumor was Donkey Kong Land Returns. And we just talked ourselves into that. There is nothing to go off of there. This is like before DK Vine had sources. This is before people were leaking us stuff. It was just like, Donkey Kong Land Returns. They've got to do it.
I mean,
right?
Mario 3D Land was a thing. It was the next logical step, right?
Yeah, so then I think a GameStop in Australia, because we broke this story, a GameStop in Australia put out the reservation game case for Donkey Kong 3D for the 3DS with like renders of Donkey and Diddy from Returns on it. And this was 2012? Late 2012, I think like October 2012.
And I remember
maybe.
not even especially being confident it was a real thing because, you know, your local GameStop can just print out something they photoshopped and shove it in a game case and just have that on the shelf. But
although, you know, why Donkey Kong? Like, even as popular as Donkey Kong thing is kind of, Donkey Kong is, it's kind of a blind spot for, like, again, hardcore gamers. Like, they don't realize how big Donkey Kong is. So it's like not something like a GameStop would stage, even as a joke. Like, it's not like the Battletoads meme, even, you know, where it's just like, ha, Battletoads. It was just weird. And nothing came from this for several months until right before E3 2013 in a Nintendo Direct. I think it was like the last Nintendo Direct before E3, or it's like April or something. It was like getting close to E3, but not E3. And they announced Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, which was a port from Monster Games, going off of what Retro did, obviously. And there's just a lot of confusion at the time, like, why? Like, why does this game exist? Why does this exist? Donkey Kong Country Returns was a huge success for Nintendo. And so I guess they were just like, well, we can do this. Let's just do it. Looking back on it, knowing what we would get for the rest of the decade after Tropical Freeze, which was Tropical Freeze. And I guess Donkey Kong Adventure and Donkey Kong Skylanders, but a lot of like stopgaps, right? I wish instead of Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D, we would have gotten Donkey Kong Land Returns, because Monster Games did a great job with the new levels in the game. They expanded the Cloud World, the actual
the Golden
like
Temple.
The Golden
area.
Temple, that whole realm, they made it a full world, and those new levels that they designed, based on, you know, archetypes from the original game, but still. I mean,
I ragged on them not including the Virtual Boy level, but I think that it's fair that a lot of these, I think, were rooted in asset flipping, so...
Yeah. I mean, it was a lower budget title.
You work with what you have, and not only were these levels, like, very, very fun additions, but the game itself is just also a surprisingly good conversion of a Wii game to the 3DS. You lose texture depth and frame rate, but it still holds up very well, and the 3D effect really complements it.
The 3D effect makes this game, and I know a lot of people, and if you don't have depth perception, obviously you can't partake in this, and that's the downside to any 3D whatever, but the 3D effect in Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D was kind of exhilarating for me. Having a 3D perspective on the Congo jungle in the background, I was like, whoa, I'm there.
I also would probably be remiss if I didn't point out this was the first retro developed Donkey Kong Country, well, you know, by way of Monster Games, of course, that you could play with a traditional control scheme, and that was a big deal for a lot of people.
And this is why I still maintain that even though people have a problem with the frame rate, this is my ideal way of playing Donkey Kong Country Returns until they put it on a new console. Because
absolutely,
I didn't have a problem with the waggle controls necessarily, but once I played it on the 3DS, I was like, all right, all right, this isn't a Jungle Beat situation where when you remove the original controls, it just ruins the whole point of the game, which I feel like New Play Control Jungle Beat certainly did. As weird as the bongos might feel at first, Jungle Beat is essential to be played with the bongos. You can't really get a feel for the game otherwise. Whereas Returns didn't need to have the waggle controls. And once you get back to a normal traditional control scheme, it's like, that's better.
I would say of the currently available ways to, the non-legally nebulous ways to
Right.
play Donkey Kong Country Returns, the 3DS game is the definitive way to play it. And I do feel a little bit uneasy that I feel that the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection kind of gives me the impression that if Nintendo were to ever re-release Donkey Kong Country Returns again in some form, and I feel like that will probably happen at some point. I have nothing to indicate that, but it's Donkey Kong Country Returns. I very much suspect it probably won't have all of the extra features that Monster Games added, and I feel like that's a very big shame because they are very worthwhile.
They are. And I feel like it is like the more complete version of the game. Graphical fidelity aside, it just, like, that cloud world really fills in what was missing from the original. So it's weird to me that my favorite 3DS game is just a port of a Wii game, of my favorite Wii game. But it's true. It's true. And I feel like the 3DS, I liked Mario Kart 7. I think Mario Kart 7, which weirdly enough, Retro also had a hand in, they like co-developed that.
You can tell because it's the one Mario game where Donkey Kong has his massive beefy arms from Donkey Kong Country Returns.
He has his beefy arms, and he has the most faithful track he's ever gotten in a Mario Kart game, where it's just straight out of Donkey Kong Country Returns. You've got the Froggoons jumping around, you've got Tiki Goons, you've got Screaming Pillars, and this was brought into Mario Kart 8, but, Mario Kart 7 is where it debuted. And Mario Kart 7, I feel like, started the trend of fixing the flaws of Mario Kart that really started springing up around Double Dash, but then just grew wildly out of control with Mario Kart. Was it Wii? Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I did a very hard turn on Mario Kart with Mario Kart Wii. It was kind of where the slow build-up of things that I didn't really love about Mario Kart were suddenly hitting critical mass. And Mario Kart 7, while it didn't iron out all of them, and I do think it has its faults, I think was definitely the first indication of taking a step back and examining the series. What are we currently doing that doesn't work, and can we ease off on it a little bit? And it is reflective of that, and a lot of these improvements were carried forward into Mario Kart 8, which is, well, I suppose it's a deluxe version now. Aside from its character roster, the strongest Mario Kart. Yeah,
absolutely. So I have respect for Mario Kart 7. It's not my favorite Mario Kart, but it is playable, and it started a lot of good trends that Mario Kart 8 followed through on. Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS, on the other hand, for me, represents such a low point in both how I felt about Smash Brothers, and really, I think just Smash Brothers in general, because of what the very existence of that game meant for the Wii U counterpart.
Yeah, it's a very conflicting title for me because, like, as a portable Smash Brothers, which is an exciting prospect, it's a very impressive execution on that idea. but also one that really didn't need to exist in the form it did, with the weird bifurcation of content between it and its Wii U counterpart.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt like somewhere between those two games, there was a good Smash Brothers, but it got ripped in two, and you were just left with this bloody half.
It's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich where nobody actually put the two pieces of bread together. Is
yeah,
what it is.
Yeah. And I honestly played the 3DS version more than a Wii U version, because by the time the Wii U version came out, I was just kind of done with it already. But I have to pin most of the problems on the 3DS version.
I think it might ultimately be the stronger package of the two, and part of that is just because a lot of the places the Wii U version suffers is because of direct limitations imposed by the 3DS version. Like, say, no longer being able to have the ice climbers and cutting everybody but Charizard from Pokemon Trainer. But because those concessions were made for the 3DS, they don't feel like concessions in the 3DS version. And also just some of the mode distribution in the 3DS version feels better. Smash Run is a way, way more appealing mode than the sort of party mode in its Wii U counterpart. It's not perfect, but it's still a mode I like, or at least it feel like had a lot of potential.
It gave us critters at a time when Kremlin recognition was at an all-time low.
There was no reason that couldn't have been a Returns enemy in there.
Yeah. They did put Tiki Buzzes in there, but yeah. But with Ultimate coming out, it's like the whole Smash 4 era feels like a bad dream to me. Like, did that really happen? It just feels like so far removed from where we are with Smash now.
Even just directly, this is a Smash Brothers you can play on the go with absolutely no concessions made.
Yeah. So I think out of everything we've talked about on this podcast, I think Smash for Nintendo 3DS is the one area where a handheld game existing hurt the product more than benefited the franchise. But besides that, I'm going to miss Nintendo's handhelds. I feel that obviously, the future, we have the Switch, and it is a handheld system as well as a console, but we're not going to get Jungle Climber on the Nintendo Switch. We're not going to get the next iteration of Jungle Climber, King of Swing, or, a weird title that would never exist on the console when we're just going to get a Donkey Kong Country or something of that caliber.
This is part of my appreciation for Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, is it feels like the outlier in that scenario. It feels like a game developed with the same sort of sensibilities we'd see from a Game Boy Advance or a Nintendo DS title.
That's actually a good point. I hadn't considered that, but you're absolutely right. In another era, Impossible Lair might have just been a DS title, and it certainly would have done well in that format. But yeah, I'm going to miss the possibilities. Having it all on one console is nice, but when the DS existed alongside the Wii, or when the GBA existed alongside the GameCube, it was okay, well, now we have two systems where we might get a Donkey Kong game. And Jungle Beat didn't really excite the fan base at the time, although we've certainly come around on it, or at least I have since then. But we had King of Swing. We had the Donkey Kong Country trilogy remakes. we had things to look forward to, and there was that greater diversity of releases between the two, and we saw them still be experimental up through like Grunny's Revenge is an experimental take on the banjo format, much more successful for the fan base than something like Nuts and Bolts was, but also a lot less stakes put into it, right? I mean, there's a lot less pressure on something like Grunny's Revenge than on the big Xbox console debut of Banjo-Kazooie.
To be sure, it's if you, in a direct comparison with Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, it's a less meaty game, but it couldn't have been anything but that. And with what it's working on, it's one of the best executions on that idea you could ask for.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people are saying right now, well, Hyle and Cameron, sure, the Switch is just but one console, but Nintendo is also releasing games on the mobile platform now, and that in turn kind of fills that gap that the absence of the Game Boy or the DS leaves. But oh boy,
I think those mobile titles, some of those mobile titles seem to want to create the gap, and it's between the folds in my wallet.
There is a difference still. Yeah. There's a difference still between mobile releases, the intent behind mobile releases, and something that was just released as a standalone product, a cartridge or a card you just slip into this device that is only used for gaming.
At the very least, even acknowledging the merits of some of Nintendo's mobile ventures, they're still very clearly applying a different philosophy to mobile development than they were their own handhelds. So yes. Even if that indicates the future direction, we are very much not there yet. And
also, from just a preservation standpoint, I can't help but feel that the mobile games have this ephemeral quality to them where I don't feel this grand permanence. Like, It's Mr. Pants would probably be a great mobile title. Was a mobile title,
absolutely.
Obviously.
Mr. Pants, I'd say, was ahead of its time. That would have been an amazing phone game.
And it was. They did make a mobile Infusio did make a mobile version
in an era where not too many people were playing games on their phones.
Yes. But the thing is, okay, I can pick out my cartridge of It's Mr. Pants and put it in my GBA at any time and play it. Whereas, I feel like Mario Kart Tour could just disappear tomorrow and it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, even to the extent, say, Donkey Kong Country can get delisted from the Wii Virtual Console, but you can still play it if you downloaded it. Something like Mario Kart Tour is kind of a live service game. They can, it's online. They can drop support whenever they like.
And it's hard for me to get emotionally attached to anything like that. Sea of Thieves. Yeah, Sea of Thieves is something we play every week together, Cameron. And it's
Sea of Thieves will never die. That's different.
No. Look, if they ever shut down the servers, I will fly over to Twycross and take it for myself, and we'll just run the Sea of Thieves server out of my own office. I don't care.
It at least helps, I think, that Sea of Thieves has constructed enough of a narrative for itself that if they did decide to close the book on it, I feel like it would feel like closing the back cover of the book and not just abruptly pulling the plug.
Yeah. And I know our friend Josh Wallen has waxed about this, about the Sonic mobile titles that are just gone now, right? They're just gone. They don't exist. And there's just this piece of history that is unobtainable. And that is my biggest fear about this era of gaming. And, maybe it's just unfounded, but I don't think it is. And also,
I mean, we've seen firsthand how Nintendo's preservation can be in general, and it can be very spotty.
Well, that's why I'm less worried about something like Sea of Thieves, because Microsoft is very good, at least from the 360 era onward, of preservation.
Incidentally, a very good reason to tightly cling to your Nintendo 3DS. That is currently the piece of Nintendo hardware where, with the exception of Tropical Freeze, you can play every single Donkey Kong Country and Land game in some form.
Yeah. So anyway, and I bring up mobile titles too because Nintendo just filed a trademark for Donkey Kong Country for over 40 products in Japan, including mobile titles. So we might be dealing with in the future of a Donkey Kong title that is on the mobile platform, like Mario Kart Tour or Dr. Mario World or Super Mario Run or Pokemon Go. And we'll have to deal with kind of the moth-like existence, the fruit fly-like existence of this Donkey Kong game that I mean, maybe we'll find a way to preserve it. We certainly did with Donkey Kong Country Barrel Maze.
Yeah. In a few years we'll be talking about Donkey Kong Country Barrel Maze mobile, and I will have a lot of words about trying to get the steel keg from the gacha pool.
And then, Nintendo is still doing things like one-off releases. The Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch release that just came out for the 35th, the color LCD screen, which just feels weird to me. It feels gimmicky. It's and Nintendo's always done gimmicks like this. I mean, even things like the e-reader for the Game Boy Advance, which I still think is pretty fucking cool. It was just a gimmick.
I mean, it's a novelty item. It's cool, but it's
a novelty item. But I remember when I announced this episode, or when I talked about this on Twitter the other week, they're like, what do you mean Nintendo's discontinuing their handhelds? They're releasing Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch. And I'm like, that's not the same thing. That is a separate little novelty piece of Fudgy the Whale cake that you're going to eat, and then you're just not going to pick it up again. I don't know. I'm sad, Cameron. I'm sad because I see the future and it's a lot less interesting without having possibilities of games like Jungle Climber and Star Fox Command and It's Mr. Pants and Runny's Revenge. It was hard enough for me when Rare's handheld team was shuttered and they are all just reincorporated into the body of Rare. But now it's there's not even a handheld anymore. So
yes, Hyle. The death of a handheld was definitely what prevented another It's Mr. Pants from ever happening.
You can't disprove that. All right. We've got a call to take. So it's been a while since I've opened up the old DK Vine hotline, but you too can call the DK Vine hotline. Just dial, do I even remember the number? 1-202-630-VINE. That's 8463 on touch-tone phone. But give us a call. Call us anytime. Leave us a message. But we probably won't play it until we get to a call sack episode, unless it is applicable to the episode at hand that we've announced. And we do have a call that's applicable to the episode at hand, the episode that's in our hand, because it is a handheld episode. I'm going to play it, and we are going to respond to it. We're going to have a good chuckle. We're going to have a good cry, and then we're going to bid farewell.
Hey, this is Just Andre, and I am calling in this episode to take the opportunity to talk about actually my entire introduction to the Donkey Kong series. That being Donkey Kong Country on Game Boy Color. It's funny, I had no idea, the broader context surrounding that game. I didn't, it was my stepbrother's copy. I was probably 10, 12 years old when I played it. I don't know. I didn't know what a Super Nintendo was, really. I played one before. I used to play Mario World and Yoshi's Island in my dentist's office, but I just didn't know. I didn't have any conception that it was even developed outside of Japan. I recognized the Rare logo, because even though this was my intro to Donkey Kong, it wasn't my intro to the DKU, that was Banjo. So I recognized the Rare logo at the beginning, but I'm just like, oh, okay, that's a thing Nintendo puts in front of their games sometimes for some reason. It was made by Nintendo, right? It says Nintendo on it. But even with all that misunderstanding, and even though this was, a Game Boy Color downgraded port job, it stuck out to me, like, immediately. Like, all these things about it, like, just, like, my main point of reference against it was, Super Mario Land, and compared to that game I noticed, and, compared even to 2D platformers on other systems I played, I noticed, like, the action of just jumping off an enemy's head, how crisp and fluid the motion was, how strong the sense of, like, forward momentum in playing through the levels was. And something else that I've never seen anyone talk about, even in the original versions, how, because like in Super Mario Land or any other 2D Mario, everyone runs into this. You try to jump on an enemy, you misjudge it slightly, you hit them slightly from the side, and you get killed. And DKC Game Boy Color, just like all the others, is so forgiving. Like, okay, the game knows what I want to do. I hit the enemy slightly from the side, but it gives me the kill. It only punishes you if you, like, legitimately screw it up. And so, all these things, it was a window into, like, how games could be different, even back then. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Thank you for the call, Just Andre. And speaks to our point about how every Donkey Kong game or version of a Donkey Kong Country game even could be an introduction to the DKU or the Donkey Kong series for someone. In this case, it was Donkey Kong Country, the Game Boy Color version, which is the lesser talked about of the three main versions. And my theory too, controversial theory, is that you could take Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color and view it as not just the events of Donkey Kong Country happening again, but a Donkey Kong Land to Donkey Kong 64, where K. Rool just steals the bananas again, and they just repeat the same adventure again, but it kind of brings everything full circle from the Rare era of Donkey Kong.
At the very least, I wonder if that was the intention behind why there is a Donkey Kong Country port on the Game Boy Color, like as a companion game to DK64.
Well, and it really was, in a lot of ways, a companion game to DK64, right down to the title screen, or the menu was just...
The very strange, directly ripped from Donkey Kong 64 menu screen with the low polygon DK.
Yeah, and then they also did some other things in the game to kind of bring it closer to DK64, like the animal crates in the game. You didn't ride any animal buddies in the game. You transformed into them via animal transformation crates, which only appeared in DK64. And there were some technical limitations why they went the transformation route, which wasn't introduced till DKC2 in the original SNES trilogy, but that was through animal barrels and it just weird like stuff like that makes the coconut gun plays a big role in the Crosshairs Cranky. I was going to say Crackshot Cranky. Crosshairs Cranky mini games that you access. Donkey Kong uses the coconut gun on Kremlings in that. So it's like, wait, does this take place after Donkey Kong 64? Or before, because it's just giving me mixed signals.
Gives Funky another hat to wear in the form of fishing.
Right, which the Game Boy Advance version actually expanded on, and it introduced a unique level in...
Oh, yeah, Necky Nutmare.
Yeah. Necky Nutmare, right. Was it Chimp Caverns or Kremkrock that was
Chimp Caverns, the world that could definitely benefit from an extra level, though maybe not necessarily a cave one.
Give us another cave. That's what Donkey Kong Country needs. One more cave level. One more cave level. Yeah, but you mentioned how it's a shame that, the extra levels from Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D will probably never see the light of day when they bring back Donkey Kong Country Returns. Necky Nightmare certainly didn't see the light of day, even when essentially the same team redid the game a few years later for the Game Boy Advance. So, and they did bring in elements from the Game Boy Color game, like Funky's Fishing. So, I don't know, but yeah, that is an exclusive level to the Game Boy Color version. So, thank you for the call, Andre. And I just want to check in real quick into the live stream chat where we have some people hanging out, like just Andre. I see our friend Deadeye Dre, who is also the co-writer of Golden Sands blog post, along with DK Vine editor Jeff the Brash. Deadeye Dre says DK is a himbo. I don't remember the context for that, but it's true. Oh, and Gibbon is giving us a history lesson on Mario versus Donkey Kong. I should have seen that coming. Says, well, to give you a concept of that, the Mario vs. Donkey Kong team helped out on both Captain Toad and Mario Maker, which has sort of supplanted both sides of it, both the play style and the level making / sharing. It's a good point. That's actually a very good point. And, I feel like the brand integrity of Donkey Kong is a much more important thing than it used to be at Nintendo. As I said, even things like New Donk City and Super Mario Odyssey are handled so delicately, as if to say, like, we don't want to step on the Donkey Kong franchise's toes. We're acknowledging the historical shared connection between the two, but we're not going to go all in. But we're taking Pauline as our own character.
There's still debate over whether or not Donkey Kong is actually in that game, and you don't arrive at something that contentious without trying to.
Nintendo is being very deliberate in a lot of their choices, and this is what I'm saying. They were deliberate with Super Mario Odyssey. They were deliberate with how they brought back Junior in Mario Kart Tour. They are being more self-conscious about what they're doing with Donkey Kong than they have been really ever. Like, even when Rare was shepherding the series, they were having parallel versions of Donkey Kong exist in games. So yeah, this is definitely a new era, and it's an era where people at Nintendo are caring about Donkey Kong and everything around it. So as a fan, I find that very cool. Well, Cameron, here we are at the end of the 3DS, the end of Nintendo's handhelds, and the end of the episode. Is there anything you would like to say as we close this book on really a 31 year odyssey of Nintendo and gaming in general?
I don't know really what to say. I guess I can just leave with one final observation. So, E3 2019, which you and I attended.
Oh, you mean the one that actually happened?
Yeah, the one that actually
E3
happened.
2020. Yeah.
This last E3, potentially the last E3. At that E3, this was kind of at the point where the writing was on the wall for the 3DS, I would say. But I do remember at that show, passing by the Sega area of the convention floor, which you'll remember from the Mario and Sonic wall climb.
Check that out on YouTube.
And one of the titles they were showing off was Persona Q2 for the 3DS, which was kind of like a late-to-be-localized 3DS title. And I remember thinking at the time, this is probably the last time I will see a Nintendo 3DS at E3. And now it's potentially the last handheld I will see, last Nintendo handheld I will see at an E3. And it also potentially means, depending on how things go from here, the Nintendo handheld line survived to the end of E3.
And also, that was the Sega wall climb was also to promote the new Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, which was for the Summer Games 2020, which did not happen. So that might be the last time you saw a Nintendo handheld at E3. You saw E3, and you saw anything closely resembling the Olympic Games. So,
but you know what? It's a good thing you got in on that climbing, because it will absolutely have prepared you for 2024's DK King of Swing Mobile.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.